When we get going, I'll try to be real diligent about keeping the chat active and everything. But as people are talking, feel free to be um, either submitting ideas that you had while the speaker's sharing, or um, you know, um, throw verbal tomatoes or whatever you need to do. Um, just kidding.
It's the first time I've heard that.
Me too. Anyway, so, but yeah, just feel free to be as active as you'd like in the chat and everything. And so I know there were some people who said they might not be able to hop in until maybe some later sessions. So I don't want to wait too long to go ahead and get started. But the whole thought with the Hive is that we want to add value to preachers, and that we want to give people really practical ideas and share some thoughts on how to just grow and become a better minister, so we could be more effective in the ministries that we're in, and the areas that we're in. And so everybody who's attended the last one, and a ton of people looking forward to this one, just really excited, because I think there's a real hunger, a real desire as preachers to grow and to improve and to excel still more. So that's really the whole point of the Hive, is to come together, share ideas, collaborate. That's why we not only hear lessons from great preachers, people who are really active in ministry, like BJ and Danny and Cliff. We'll hear from him later. But then also we have those Q&A sessions typically a little bit after each session. So we'll be able to actually communicate and cooperate with one another in that way as well. So, but feel free in the chat as well to share ideas, because that's really why we're here, to collaborate and to learn. And I think we can all learn from each and everyone. This is why I'm not one of the speakers. We can all learn from each person on this call. So, and another thought I had about the Hive when we were first getting it started last quarter was, even if we could get like 1, 2, or 3 people on the call, like right now we have 9 and more will file in, I'm sure. We ended up having, I think, 40 or 50 people on the call last quarter. But even if we just had a couple, that if we were able to share some ideas that were able to help those few people to go out, and that we could apply those things in our local areas, the amount of lives that we can impact is really quite endless. And so, but I think it just takes that teachability to not just listen and learn and have a humble heart in hearing what to do, but then also having an even humbler heart of, I'm going to take what I heard and go out and apply it. And sometimes that requires change on our parts, but we need to be open-minded to that. And so, so I'm really looking forward to what we're going to hear today. We'll go ahead and have BJ really jump in a couple minutes here. Looking forward to what he has to say. BJ, before you really jump in, maybe now would be a good time, or maybe you have it worked into your introduction anyway, but go ahead and tell the people on here who maybe don't know you super well a little bit about you and what you're going to be talking about today.
Sure. So hello, everybody. I think half of you and maybe most of you, but I'm BJ Sipe, and we are currently working here in Danville, Kentucky, my wife and my 2 children, and we have been a little bit all over the place. I know Jeff Carr from when I grew up in the Northwest, and then Jeff went and started working with the church in the in Hawkinson and the Vancouver area, Camas area of Washington. And we are just so blessed to have been all over the place. I went to school in Florida and met my wife there. We went back to Oregon for several years and partnered with a church out there. And then we spent some time in Texas, what many refer to as the Promised Land. And I didn't experience that, but it was a good time to be down there in Texas. And then we have recently, in the last 2 years, come up here to Kentucky and have put down roots and made our home here. And we are just really blessed to work with the church here and partner with the church here. I love to write. A little bit about me: I do a lot of writing, and mostly in blog form. I do something called a Danville Daily, and am committed to that every single day, aside from Sundays. And so that has been part of my work since I've gotten here, and has helped us in our community and just getting involved with people in our community. And I am a big Oregon Ducks fan. So just, you need to know that about me, because I've got some sports analogies and this morning's lesson. So you'll either have to forgive me or bear with me with that. But what we're going to be talking about this morning, Johnny reached out to me, and I'm really humbled that he even considered me, and I'm probably the very least qualified person to deliver a message here. Honestly, but I'm more than willing to offer what I can by way of encouragement to a group of men who have dedicated their lives to the service of Jesus, and try to do what I can to encourage everybody. But what we're going to be talking about is when to say yes and when to say no. And what I believe is one of the biggest problems that preachers have. And we're going to get into this in just a minute as we start our study. But we really want to talk about this principle that everything that you say yes to, you say no to something else. And many times the reason that preachers end up failing their families or failing in keeping up with the commitments they've made, over promising and under delivering, is because we don't consider that. We don't consider what we're saying no to when we say yes to different things, and we try to say yes to everything, and we end up getting ourselves into a hole. And so we want to talk about that and how to prevent that in our ministry and in our work this morning. So that's what I'm going to be talking about in a few minutes. So I'll throw it back over to you, Johnny.
Thanks so much. Thanks for that introduction. Yeah, we're all looking forward to that. I think every preacher, the reason I asked BJ to speak on this is not only because he's so consistent with his Danville Daily, and that's something that's just really public, but I also know that he's not just consistent with that, but BJ is such a genuine guy, and who he is, sort of when you meet him and when you see what you see on social media, that's who he is. He's just genuine, he's sincere. And so I knew that he'd be the right guy to talk about making commitments and following through on those commitments, and how can we set ourselves up in a way to actually do that, because it's something I know that I struggled with when I was in full-time ministry, and even still, and so many preachers I know struggle with this, is just exactly what BJ mentioned: over promising and under delivering. And I think we all want to grow in that area, and so I think it's just going to be a really practical lesson on that. I think it's going to be valuable to everybody, and I'm really excited to hear what BJ has to say. So without any further ado, BJ, I'll throw it back over to you. People will file in as they do, but preach the word, man.
All right. Thanks, Johnny. And again, thank you so much for this opportunity. I really appreciate what you're doing here, and us all getting together and sharing concepts, sharing ideas. Iron sharpens iron. And that implies that we need sharpening, that sometimes we can get dull. And not to say that our preaching can get dull. I think it can sometimes. I know that's certainly true for me, but I know that I need sharpened. And so these are wonderful opportunities for me to grow. I really appreciate the wisdom that is represented here. There are people here that have been preaching for, twice as long as I've even been alive. And I'm just very grateful for your work, for your ministry, for your love for Jesus. And I hope that together we can look into God's word, because I don't have any wisdom to offer to you from my own experience. But what we want to do is look into God's word and glean from some truths there and see what God has to teach us today. So let's begin with a word of prayer, and then we'll jump into our topic for today. Blessed Father, we approach you as your children, and we want to first of all give you praise. We thank you for the way that you have loved us. We thank you for your righteousness and your justice and your mercy. And Father, we praise you for Jesus. Without him, we have no hope. Without him, we have no future. And without him, we remain in our sins. And so, Father, you have lavished us with your grace, and you have given us work to do and have sent us on a mission. And Father, we pray that we will fulfill our work and to dedicate ourselves to the work of evangelists. And Father, that you bless us with wisdom, that you bless us with confidence, and that you bless us with the time to be able to accomplish the work that you have asked us to do. Father, we thank you so much for Johnny, and we thank you for the way that he has organized this, and with the help of Wayne and so many others that have put this together. Father, we pray that you continue to bless them and bless their families in the way that they strive to encourage other evangelists and other preachers and other men who are dedicated to your work. And Father, please help us to use these opportunities to grow and to benefit other brethren and other sisters in Christ. We love you. Please give us wisdom today. Help us to only seek the truths that are found in your word. and help us to mold ourselves to those truths, no matter how uncomfortable and no matter how difficult they might be at times. Thank you most of all, of course, Father, for the way that you have changed us through your Spirit and have not just given us a hope of heaven, but have given us a mission to share that hope with others. And Father, we pray that we may live out the gospel in our everyday. It's in your Son's name we pray. Amen. All right, as we start, one of the things that I have been guilty of in my life, and this is in ministry and also not in ministry, that I think is really easy for preachers to fall into, is we can become yes men. And what I mean by that is not in the sense of telling people anything that they want to hear. I think that there are some in the Christian world that become yes men and just telling people what they want to hear. And Paul warns about that in Scripture. But what I mean by that is more from the sense that with a very good intentioned heart, we always want to say yes when somebody asks us to do something. We always want to say yes because we want to help others. That's why all of us are doing what we are doing. We love souls, we love others, and we want to serve them in our lives. And so whether it's a new study or that gospel meeting or a counseling session, or that wedding you have to travel for, whatever it might be, we want to say yes. And so without really even considering whether we should, we commit to it and we say, yes, I'll do that, or yes, I'm on board. And what ends up happening very quickly in our lives is we end up over-promising and under-delivering. When in reality, what we need to do is under-promise and over-deliver. But we make all these commitments and find ourselves doing them, a lot of things just okay, rather than a few things very well. And this is often why you find preachers that are burnt out or end up having to go back on something that they committed to. Because like New Year's resolutions, after a short while, we abandon what we have set out to do or what we had promised that we could do, because we hadn't considered everything that was going to go into it and whether I could really budget that or not. And how does this happen? Because this is very, very common in the world of preaching. And I think that Cliff is going to talk more about perseverance later on in our ministry and not getting burnt out. But this over-promising and under-delivering is very common amongst evangelists and amongst preachers. And I believe it's because of three different things that we want to talk about today. And I'm going to try to speak for, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, and then give us a lot of time for Q&A afterwards. But the three things that we want to focus on is, first of all, we accept the wrong model. And that's what we're going to talk about first. And that's the pastor model. And we'll define that in a few minutes. And we want to look at Ephesians 4. And this is a model that is placed on you in your ministry, placed on you in your work as an evangelist. And that if we accept that model that's placed on us by an eldership or by a church or a group of men or a men's meeting, then we are setting ourselves up for failure and the church up for failure. The second thing we want to look at is we give the wrong answer. And this is where we really want to flesh out this yes and no principle, that everything we say yes to, we say no to something else. And we want to look at Jesus' ministry and different things he says in Luke 4 and in Luke 14. And this is something that we do ourselves. It's not something that's placed on us, but this is something that we place on ourselves. And so that's the yes and no principle. The final thing we want to look at this morning or this afternoon for the East Coast time is that we have the wrong expectations. That we have these grand ideas that we're going to set out and do this work, and we have an anticipation of the way that we think it's going to go or the fruit it's going to bear, but it is not immediate, and it doesn't happen in the timetable that I want it to happen. And so because of that, we're very quick to give up on something. And so we want to look at the parable of the sower in Luke 8 and some different things that Paul says to the Colossians in Colossians chapter 1. But let's begin by going back and looking at this first reason why often we overpromise and end up under-delivering. And that is because of the wrong model in our work. And that is what I'm going to refer to as the pastor model in this discussion. And the pastor model is something that has often been imposed upon an evangelist in his work in the local church. And we're going to define this some more. But essentially what the pastor model is is that a church is built upon the pastor, and he's kind of the foundation, the preacher, and he's the one who does most of the work and all of the organization and all the work, and everyone else is kind of just a spectator in this. And we might think, well, we've rejected that model, as a church. We don't accept that model. But I have actually found that more often than not, we accept that. We just call it something different. Case in point, when someone tells you where they worship or where they're from, and you find out what church they go to, what's the very first question that oftentimes people ask next? When someone tells you, I go to this church, you say, oh, who? And what you can fill in the blank. Who preaches there? Why do we ask that question? Why is that more important? Why don't we ask, hey, who are the shepherds there? Or if you know a family in there, is that where so-and-so worships? But almost always the first question that someone asks is, oh, who preaches there? And that's really because of this pastor model that's been built into the culture of so many churches. And with that pastor model, church growth is attributed entirely upon the work of the evangelist. That if the church grows, it's because, oh, well, this person started working with us and, he's the evangelist. And as soon as he came, things just started to get better. Or if the church doesn't grow, then that's also the evangelist's fault. And he's going to be, fired because the church hasn't grown the way that you want it to. I'll give you a personal illustration. I worked with a church in one period in my life that in a sit down with the leadership there and the shepherds there, where I was working as an evangelist. Over the year, I had baptized about 3 or 4 people. And at the yearly meeting, they came to me and said, you've baptized about 3 or 4 people, but we've really actually wanted to see 5 or 6. I said, oh, okay. There were more than, it doesn't matter who baptizes them. Like, where did this quota come from? And that's what happens is, we want to see exactly how many did they baptize, themselves. That would have been a great question back. Didn't have that quick thinking at that moment in my life, but that's a great question, but the intention or the implication behind that question was, well, the church needs to grow, and we wanted it to grow by this number, and you didn't baptize that many people. And so, you're in trouble. Basically, you haven't done your job as an evangelist because you didn't baptize a certain number of people. Everything in this model, this pastor model, gets placed on you. If a new study happens, you're the one who's called. You need to pick it up. You're the one who does the bulletin. You're the one who does the adult classes. You're the one who organizes and makes contact with people for different special interest topics or meetings. You're the one who organizes the singings. You're the ones who preach the sermons. You're the one who puts together the curriculum. You're the one who changes the sign out front. I actually had one preacher who said when he went to partner with a church that their expectations of him was he needed to mow the grass once a week. That he needed to mow the grass at the building. That was part of his responsibilities as an evangelist. Now, as a Christian, I'd be happy, to mow someone's grass or to mow the grass at the building. But this was part of his job description as an evangelist, was that he was to mow the grass. This is the pastor model. And we don't want to lose our job. And we certainly don't want to feel like we're not working hard enough in their eyes due to their expectations. So we say yes. We say yes to everything. We take it all on and think, I can do this. I can do it all. And at the moment that we say yes to this model, we are setting both ourselves and the church up for most certain failure. Because this is not God's model. The pastor model is not God's model. The model that we see is described in Ephesians chapter 4. And so let's turn over there together to Ephesians chapter 4. And we want to begin looking at verse 11. And in this section, Paul is discussing the different gifts that Jesus has sent to men in order to help men and equip men with the work that God has called them to do. And these are the gifts that he gave to men. Verse 11, he gave these gifts: apostles, prophets, evangelists, shepherds, and teachers. These are gifts that God has given to the church, that God has given to man. And these first two, we still have. People have often looked at this and misapplied this and say, well, we don't obviously have apostles and prophets anymore, but we have evangelists, shepherds, and teachers. That's very incorrect. We do have apostles and prophets. We know that from Scripture You look at 2 Timothy chapter 3, that all scripture is inspired by God and profitable for teaching, for correction, and training in righteousness, that the man of God may be equipped for every good work. The very next thing he's going to say in verse 12 is that these things are to equip people. That's exactly what Paul says the word does, that the apostles and the prophets, the words that we have from them, their labor and their ministries that we can read of and understand, are meant to equip us. But these other three we still have in the church today. These are offices, so to speak, in the church today, roles in the church today. Evangelists, that's us. Shepherds, that might even be some of you. And teachers, that certainly is all of us. And I want you to notice what their job is. When you look at verse 12, he says he gave apostles, prophets, evangelists, shepherds, and teachers. And what he does not say next is that he gave these for the work of ministry. Now, that's going to be partially true. They are going to be in ministry. But he says that he gave these to equip the saints for the work of ministry. See, even our language that we use betrays that we buy more into the pastor model than we do the biblical model. Because we talk about, well, I'm in ministry, and we reserve that for preachers. You know, are you in ministry? Now, we might use the term full-time ministry, and does that mean, well, because I'm getting paid? Well, no, that doesn't mean you're a full-time minister, and that's another discussion for another time. But this idea of ministry, we reserve for preacher. Well, we mean that he dedicates his life to the service of God. That's the pastor model. When actually God's model is this: if you're in Christ, you're a minister. That's what this says, that the apostles and prophets and evangelists and shepherds and teachers are to equip the saints for the work of ministry. Ministry only means service. That our role, our job is not to do all of the work of service in the church. That's the pastor model. Our job is to serve, and in addition to that, equip others in the church to serve as well. This model from God is not saying that we alone are the ones in whom the workforce and what God has called for the church to do, that this is how it flows, is it all happens through the work of what the evangelist does, what the shepherd does, and what the teacher does. No, what God is saying is that the evangelist, the shepherd, and the teacher are to properly equip and build up the church in such a way that they are prepared and ready to do this work also themselves. That this is their job. This is our job collectively together as a church. This is the biblical model. And many people think, well, then why are we paying you, right? That's why we have a full-time evangelist. I'm not supposed to do this. That's not what the Bible teaches at all. Actually, in verse 14, Paul says that this is an immature way of thinking. He says that we are to do this so that we may no longer be children tossed to and fro by the waves, carried about by every wind of doctrine, by human cunning, by craftiness and deceitful schemes. A church that buys into the pastor model and believes that it's not their job to work and to be workers is an immature church. It's an immature way of thinking. We are to grow and mature a church into becoming workers. We sing songs like, I want to be a worker for the Lord, but really what many people mean by that is I want to support financially a person to be a worker for the Lord. I don't want to do the work myself. I'm not the one who's supposed to be equipped for the work of ministry, when actually that's God's plan all along, is that all of us are in this work of service together. That doesn't mean that all are going to be teachers. That doesn't mean that all are going to be evangelists. That's not what Paul's teaching here, but everyone has a part in the work of service, and it does not all fall on one individual. And yet that's what happens in many different groups. I want to tell you a very true story. I had a good friend of mine. We went to college together in Oregon, not in Florida, but before I went to Florida, I was at a community college in Oregon. And he was a part of, I'm not sure what denomination they were, but he was formerly an atheist and then became a believer and was joined together with this group. And we got together for our weekly coffee sessions because we'd studied the Bible. And there was this huge scandal with their pastor at the church there, the preacher. And he was caught in some kind of big sexual scandal with different women. And it was this terrible thing. And he was going to be stepping down immediately. And of course, I think he was actually going to jail. He didn't have a choice whether he was going to step down or not. And so I asked him, I was just curious. I was like, well, what are you guys going to do? And his answer back was not what I was expecting. What I meant was like, what's the next step? Are you guys looking for another man, to come in and fill that role? Like, what men are going to step up in his position? Like, what's going to happen? And he said, well, what can we do? We're going to have to close. And I was just shocked when he said that. I mean, what do you mean you're going to have to close? He said, well, our pastor's gone. We can't continue to run the church without him. And I was just flabbergasted by what he had said and by what he had told me. If a church is dependent upon your being there to continue to bear fruit, then you have not done your job correctly as an evangelist. If I do my job correctly as an evangelist, and if shepherds are doing their jobs correctly and teachers are doing their jobs correctly, when we leave, everything should continue on in bearing fruit exactly the way it was as though I was there. Because we've been equipping people for the work of ministry to continue on. And that's what Paul teaches Timothy. Remember what Paul would tell Timothy in 2 Timothy chapter 2, that what you have heard and seen in me, entrust to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. It's this mentorship process. It's that I taught you, you teach others who will then teach others. It's not, Timothy, all the work is on you. It's not, it was all on me. We are to be equipping the next generation. We are to be equipping the saints for the work of ministry. And that's exactly what Paul says, how the church grows. Look at the very next few verses in verses 15 and 16. Rather, speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in every way into him who is the head, into Christ, from whom the whole body, joined and held together by every joint in which it is equipped, when each part is working properly, makes the body grow so that it builds itself up in love. You know how many books have been written about church growth and dedicated to the secret of church growth? I mean, just Google it or go onto Amazon and try to type in church growth. You will find hundreds and hundreds of books talking about the secret to how to make your church grow. There is no secret. That's man's wisdom. And there might be some very edifying, good thoughts from well-studied men in some of these books. I'm not negating everything there, but it's not a secret. God told us how to grow the church right here. This is the model. If we follow through with this properly, and if evangelists and shepherds and teachers are equipping saints for the work of ministry, and we are building up the body of Christ, that every part is doing its part, that is how the church grows. Isn't that exactly what Solomon, wisest man in the world, by the way, wrote in Ecclesiastes chapter 4, that two are better than one because there's a good return for their labor? You know why, in that place I was, why there was, only like 4 or 5 baptisms? Well, because in my studies, that's who I was able to bring personally, is 4 or 5 people. But if we were able to get other people involved in the work of ministry and doing their parts and everyone doing what they can, that, number one, would free me up to do more. But number two, it has everyone else doing their part, and they're studying with others, and they're doing their part in bringing people to Christ and discipling and mentoring and teaching. And then you've got 100 people who are in the work of ministry, not just one. You want to know why the church grew the way it did in Acts? Because it wasn't just 12 guys doing the work. 12 guys did not convert the whole known world, or many in the whole known world. It was in Acts 8 that taught left after persecution and went about taking the word with them and preaching the word with them. They had been equipped and were then doing the work of ministry wherever they went. That is our goal. This is not a sporting event, right? I said at the beginning, I'm an Oregon Ducks fan. For those that came in late, please forgive me for that. But, when I go to an Oregon Ducks game, and I'm going to try to go, Oregon is playing Ohio State in football to start the season out. And so I'm going to go up to the shoe and wear my big green jersey and probably get hit by someone. But I'm going to go watch a game. I'm not going to participate in any way. I'm going to go watch them play. That's how many people think that the church works is I'm going to go watch the players. I'm going to go watch the evangelists and the shepherds and the teachers do their thing. And we brag about it. Oh, you should know brother so-and-so. He's such a great preacher. That's my preacher. And look at all the good work he's doing. That's my quarterback. When this is not a sporting event, this is a training camp. I'm going to get lessons on how to do this myself, on how to grow myself. And not everyone plays the same position. Not everyone's going to be quarterback. Not everyone's going to be offensive lineman. Not everyone's going to be, a defensive back. Everyone's got their own role, but this is a training camp. That's what the church is. This is training grounds. It's not a sporting event. And so one of the reasons why we end up over promising and under delivering is because we allow this pastor model to be placed on us and we forget what God has actually called us to do in ministry. Number two, it's because we give the wrong answer. If you get nothing else from this session, I want you to walk away with this. Everything you say yes to, you say no to something else. Everything that you say yes to, you say no to something else. We can be good stewards of our finances. We could be good stewards of our health. And I know many preachers who are very good stewards of both of those. They've thought about retirement and, they're very good about what they do because a lot of times our job is spent sitting all the time, sitting and reading, sitting and eating, sitting and thinking, sitting and talking. The only time we stand up is on Sunday, right? And so we have to take good care of our health and of our finances. We're good stewards of those. But if we're not also good stewards of our time, the rest doesn't matter. Time is the most valuable asset that we have. We cannot buy it. We cannot steal it. We cannot borrow it. We cannot beg for it. In Ephesians chapter 5, the very next passage, very next chapter, Paul talks about that we are to walk in wisdom, not as unwise, but as wise, making the best use of the time because the days are evil. Out of a good heart, we want to say yes to everything because we care. And I will give that to you. We have good intentions when we say yes so often. But if we do, every time you say yes to something, what we end up failing to understand is that when we say yes to everything, that we end up saying no to the most important things that we're not supposed to say no to. How many preachers do you know that have had children that have walked away from the faith entirely? In fact, I've found it to be a very common thing with people that have dedicated their lives to full-time preaching, that many times their children completely fall away from the faith. It's not because these men were not knowledgeable. It's not because these men, were not, trying to lay down biblical foundations in their home. But it's because many times, largely in part, I believe these men failed to understand and follow this principle, that their family was always on the outside looking in, that they said yes to everything else in an effort to save everyone else. And in doing so, said no consistently to their wife and to their children and ended up losing them. I've seen many preachers whose marriages have failed because their wife is always being told no. You don't think about it like that, but what you're doing is your wife is always the one that has to end up making the sacrifices. She never gets the time that she needs from you. And consistently, because you're too busy saying yes to everything that everyone else asks of you to do. I want you to go to Luke chapter 4 with me. This is kind of an obscure passage, but I believe has been and I don't exaggerate this. This is an obscure passage, but has been the most impactful passage out of the New Testament in my ministry and in my life. And I want to read this. And as we read this, I want to tell you a story. I want to set the stage before we read this passage. We're going to look at verses 42 through 44. I was at Florida College. I was a student there for 4 years. And in my senior year, I was in a class with a professor named Matt Johnson, a good friend of mine. And I was failing his class, by the way. And it was a speech class of some kind. I was a communication major. And I was failing his class, not because I didn't love the class and because I didn't know anything about communication. I was actually very good in these areas. But it was because I hadn't turned any work in. And I hadn't turned any work in because of how much I had going on in my life. I was overcommitted to, that's an understatement. I was an officer for a organization, and I was part of sowers, and I was actually preaching full time while a student for a church down there. I was engaged, and so I was spending most of my time with my fiance, and I was trying to juggle all my other classes. I had so much going on. I had said yes to everything. And Matt Johnson called me into his office, and I knew what it was about because I was failing his class. But how that conversation went was not what I was anticipating, and he changed my life right here. He said, I want you to open up to Luke chapter 4 and start reading in verse 42. And so I did. So I opened up my Bible and I started reading, and what I read was this. And when it was day, he departed and went into a desolate place, and people sought him and came to him and would have kept him from leaving them. But he said, I must preach the good news of the kingdom of God to other towns as well, for I was sent for this purpose. And he was preaching in the synagogues of Judea. And Matt asked me, he said, he looked at me right in the face, and he asked me, how are you not in obedience to the example of Christ with this example? I said, I have no idea what you're talking about. And he proceeded to enlighten me. And he said, look at what that text says there. There were more people that Jesus could have taught. There were more people that Jesus could have healed, and people wanted him to stay. And they were asking him, Jesus, we need you to do this. We need you to stay. We need you to say yes. And look what Jesus' answer to them was. Jesus said, no. Jesus told them no. Why? Because he had other responsibilities. Because he had a greater mission. He needed to go elsewhere to teach the gospel to places where it had not even been preached before. Jesus understood this principle that everything he said yes to, that he said no to something else. It would not have been right for him to have said yes. And yet you can imagine the way that people would have spun this. Can you imagine? Can you picture that? I went to Jesus. I asked him to come back and to heal me. He healed these other people, but he wouldn't heal me. He told me no. Or I asked Jesus to teach me. I'm just trying to be a disciple, and he told me that he won't come back and teach more. People could have spun it and made Jesus feel guilty in all kinds of ways, but the fact of the matter is, by saying yes to them, Jesus would have been saying no to other towns and his ultimate purpose, which was to travel and to preach the kingdom of God. And if Jesus could not have done it all, if Jesus at times had to say no so that he could say yes to the right things, what makes us think that we can always say yes and make us think that we can do it all? We can't. I needed to learn when to say no. And the reason I didn't is because I felt guilty about it when I did. Do not feel guilty or doubt yourself by saying yes to the right things and telling someone else no. You do not feel guilty. You need to be gracious, and maybe you can do what you can to help connect someone with someone who does have the ability to do what they've asked for you to do. But it is okay and proper, and actually we need to, at times, say no. You're not the property of the church, so don't act like it. That doesn't go over well with many people when you say that, but you are not the property of the church, so don't act like it. This is a partnership, and for the best interest of the church, you cannot say yes to everything. I want you to look at Luke chapter 14, and the direct application from Jesus is different, but we want a secondary application to pull from this. Luke chapter 14, in this context, Jesus is talking about the cost of discipleship and talks about if anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. But then Jesus gives this illustration after doing so, beginning in verse 28. And Jesus says the following, and he says, for which of you desiring to build a tower does not first sit down and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it begin to mock and say, this man began to build and was not able to finish. Or what king going out to encounter another king in war will not first sit down and deliberate whether he is able with 10,000 to meet him who comes against him with 20,000? And if not, while the other is yet a great way off, he sends a delegation and asks for terms of peace. Of course, Jesus here is trying to teach them about the cost of discipleship and understanding the commitment that comes with discipleship. But the secondary application can be applied to this discussion. You need to count the cost before you say yes. Is what I'm saying no to by saying yes to this okay? What impacts is that going to make on my family or on other works of my ministry? Can I afford that? Or can I budget this time? How much will it take realistically to do this? Financially and time-wise, and what kind of help am I going to need in order to jump in with this? We need to be realistic. And that's why Paul says in Ephesians 5, as we've already looked at, to use wisdom in how we walk. I've heard wisdom described as to see the end of a thing, and I love that definition. When someone asks you to say yes to something, try to look to the end of this thing. How long is that going to take? What is that going to take from me? And what am I going to have to say no to if I say yes to this? And then make a realistic answer. Sometimes we have grand plans. It's going to be awesome, right? I'm going to start a blog, and it's going to be a daily video blog, and it's going to be, high tech, and it's going to grab people's attention, and we're going to do this every day. And then you start getting into it and realizing how long it takes to film and edit, do all that kind of stuff. And you're like, wait a second, maybe I got in a little bit above my head. And very quickly, you're having to bow out because we didn't count the cost. We have to be realistic about what we're saying yes to. So let me give you just a little bit of unsolicited young advice, but it's helped me in my limited time in my work. Do a trial run before you commit to anything. If someone asks you to start studying with them consistently, say, hey, well, let's plan a couple sessions. Let's meet a couple times and see how that goes and see how it works for your schedule and my schedule. And then we'll reevaluate after that. Do a trial run before you commit. When someone asks you to do some writing for them, I had a publisher recently reach out to me and ask if I would partner with them in a long-term partnership relationship and helping them develop curriculums and work for high school age and middle school age. And I told them, I said, well, let's do this. Let's do a trial run. I don't want to make a commitment yet because I don't know how extensive this is going to be, whether I can actually do this and fulfill what God needs me to fulfill here to my local work and to my family. And so let's just do a trial run. Do a trial run, see how things go, get advice, and then make a decision. Because you never want to say yes to something that's going to cause you to say no to something you should not say no to. Our final point is oftentimes the reason that we overpromise and underdeliver, or the reason why we get burnt out or we never follow through with the things that we originally set out to do is because we just have the wrong expectations. Unrealistic expectations are probably the most common reason for contention in anything in this life and will cripple just about anything in this life. It could be a marriage. It could be a church. It could be a family. It could be a business. It could be health goals. Whatever it might be, unrealistic expectations are very, very common and are almost always the source of contention for things in this life. And it can cripple our work as evangelists and as preachers because we don't want to stick with it. We have these unrealistic expectations of something and how quickly we're going to be able to bear fruit from this or what it's going to do. And so we drop it too quickly. I'll give you a personal example. I started a study at a college before COVID. The college is still completely shut down. They won't let anyone on campus here, but we have a college here in Danville called Center College. It's a college of law, very prestigious. And I decided, I'm going to go there and set up a sign and just, say, open Bible study and see if anyone would sit down and study with me. And I went there for 2 months every week and sat there, and I sat there by myself for 2 months. I sat there for 8 hours, 9 hours and waving at people and had my sign open and my Bible open and trying to greet people as they walked by, and not a single person joined me. And after about 2 months, I thought, okay, this isn't going to work. And so I went back and talked to my elders and said, I'm just not getting anything. I don't think this is going to work. And they said, it's been 2 months. You need to be patient. Go back. And I was like, okay, it's been 2 months. In my mind, my expectations were, man, we should have been in the middle of a study at this point. And they said, be patient. By the time that COVID hit, several months later, we had 8 regulars and 5 of which were students at the college there. And I'm still in contact with several of them, and we've met, individually to continue doing Bible studies at different times throughout this period of COVID, even while the college is shut down. But I had these unrealistic expectations. I had this idea that this was going to get off the ground quicker and people were going to see the sign and want to sit down and study. And we were going to be engaged in deep theological discussions with these really smart kids who are way smarter than I am because of what they were studying there. And it just didn't turn out that way. It ended up bearing really good fruit, but it took time. I want you to look at the parable of the sower. And oftentimes, we look at the parable of the sower, and I think we've looked at it so many times that we think that we can't really learn anything from it. Hopefully, we can learn something from the parable of the sower today. I want you to focus in and key in on the good soil and what Jesus has to say about it in verse 15. He says, "As for that in the good soil, they are those who, hearing the word, hold fast in an honest and good heart and bear fruit with patience." They hold fast with patience in order to bear fruit. The word patience here literally means, and I love this, to stand behind. That's the literal translation for this word's patience here, is to stand behind. You need to stand behind what you started. Fruit is not produced in a day. Sometimes fruit is not produced in a month or in 2 months. And I think this is the hardest part of preaching. At least it is for me. Because at the end of the day, often you don't get to see the fruit or the growth, right? It's not like carpentry. Like if you're a carpenter, you're like, hey, today I'm going to build a table. And so the day starts out with just scraps of wood. And by the end of the day, running things through the planer and your table saw and putting pocket hole screws in and, joining everything together and fasteners. And at the end of the day, you've got this table that's ready to be, stained and sanded. And you're like, I did this today. It was nothing. And now it's a table. You don't get a lot of table days when you're an evangelist. You understand what I'm saying? You don't get a lot of table days. It's kind of like in Oregon, Christmas trees are the number 2 export. Grass seed's number 1, but Christmas trees are the number 2 export in Oregon. Do you know it actually takes 7 years to grow a Christmas tree? It takes 7 years. If you own a Christmas tree farm, that's why when you drive through the countryside of Oregon and there's so many Christmas tree farms, it's kind of like, one of those, bars for your phone with your service. You have these trees, and then 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 you have these trees. And these are the ones that are going to get cut for the season this year. The rest of these have been growing, these for 6 years, these for 5 years, these for 4 years. They're not ready. It takes years to be able to develop a crop that's ready to go. And many times as preachers and as evangelists, what we do is we read through the book of Acts and we see the growth of the churches and think it happened instantly because I can read the book of Acts in a couple hours. And so it happened quickly, when that's not true. What we read in the book of Acts took years. There are years between these chapter breaks. There are years even within some of these chapters that we're reading about. It was years of consistent, intentional, hard work. And growth in the children of God is much like growth in your own children. Your children, and many of you who have had kids, our kids are young. I've got an almost 3-year-old and a just turned 1-year-old. And they're growing up right in front of my eyes. But you don't notice it between meals, do you? You don't see the growth between meals. But I jump on Facebook and it pops up with a memory from a year ago and I go, how did this happen? This is huge. This is a huge change. And I watched the whole thing happen, but you don't see it in the moment. That's the way that growth often works in the church and with our work as ministers. See, I did it right there. We're all ministers. But as our work as evangelists, sometimes it's going to take some time. But if you stick with it, if you stand behind it, no matter what that labor that you're involved in is, you might end up being able to step back several years from now and go, wow, look at the growth. Look at the table that we've built. And that's exactly what we're doing. We're building. We're called to equip, to build up the church. And so this is all I had for you today. we need to learn when to say yes and when to say no. This is so vital and so important to our work. And if we can reject the wrong model, accept the right model in what we're called to do and what the church is called to do, and really use wisdom behind what I commit myself to, and then stand behind it, I believe that all of us will see a great difference in our work and a great difference in our relationships with our family and with others in the church if we can do these things. So I want to say thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you for your very kind attention and listening, and look forward to some of the discussion we're about to have and listening to some things that you have to say and offer in these next few minutes. So Johnny, I'll throw it back to you, and thank you guys very much.
Man, so thankful for that. I was so excited when BJ agreed to speak for us, and I think you all heard why I was so excited. So thanks so much for that, BJ. I want to open it up for questions. We have several minutes before the next speaker, Danny, is going to go. We'll probably have Danny start a little late if we get a good discussion going, because I think it'd be worth it. And then, but I want to hear from you guys. One thing that jumped out to me as you were talking about equipping people for the work of the ministry, I thought about my little brother, who is, I don't know his exact role, but he's in the Army and he's stationed in DC, but his role is basically managing the armory on the base. And so he's the armory director or manager, whatever. And it kind of made me think that's sort of what we are as ministers, right? Is we're in charge of equipping the soldiers to go out and fight the battle, where we fight our own battles as well. And my little brother's certainly able to fight his own battles, but at the same time, his job is to equip the soldiers with the weapons that they need to go out and execute their mission. And in a lot of ways, that's exactly where we are too, is we're equipment managers. And as evangelists and ministers, we equip the saints for the work of their ministry. And so many great thoughts. I have so much I'd like to share, but I want to hear from you guys. If anybody had a comment or a question they want to ask BJ, now's the time. So I'll let somebody else jump in.
I'll go ahead. I think BJ did a good job as always. Good to see you again, my friend.
Good to see you, Jeff.
And let me just say this. When I studied economics in college, there's something called opportunity cost. And that's something you basically learn, and you have two options in front of you. And the classic example is World War II. You want to make more guns, or do you want to make more butter? Do you want to make more weaponry or feed the people? And you only have enough resources to do one or the other. So you had to step back and realize what's going to be the best output here. And so when you were talking about being good stewards of our time, I think that's one of the major themes of your talk there. And that's something I think we all have to be sensitive to. You said use wisdom and see the end of the thing. I think that was a good way to look at that. I'm going to throw that opportunity cost out there as look at two decisions you have to make and realize what's the best effective use of your time and energy and what's going to produce the best outcome here. But I wonder if you or anybody else had ways for us to tackle being good stewards of our time, because I think that's a worthy discussion. It's not easy to summarize that in just one talk here, but I wonder if anybody else you, BJ, or anybody else has effective ways that we, again, can be good stewards of our time and be good time managers.
I would love to hear some thoughts from other people about that, because this balance is something that I think is different for every family. And so, what my wife needs from me is going to be different from what, Johnny's wife needs from him. So while there might be a general, model that some people put forward, you have to remember that that's what worked for them and their family. So the only answer I would give back to that is there's not a cookie cutter method to this. I think that it's going to take some trial and error, some patience on everyone's, account. And that it just takes time to learn that. And like you just said, and praying for wisdom. I will say this, I cut off Colossians at the end because I wanted to leave time for questions. But I think a lot of times what happens is we need to be patient. That's all I'm going to say is we need to be patient with learning balance. One of the three things that Paul prays for with the Colossians is he prays for them to have strength, patience, and joy. And yet when it comes to our work, often we're fatigued, impatient, and frustrated, the exact opposite of those three. And so when it comes to learning that balance and how to do that, I need to do it in such a way that it's going to take strength, it's going to take patience, and it's going to take a dedication to not get frustrated in the process. So I know that doesn't really answer your question, Jeff, but that's my initial answer. I'd love to hear back from some other people, but I don't think there's a cookie cutter method to figuring that out.
So true. And one thing I'll interject, because I want to hear from other people too, like, and I hesitate to share just because, I mean, we don't do it perfectly. I don't think anybody does anything perfectly, but sort of the way we've worked it out in our family is we've gone to scripture, and we try to make decisions about how to spend our time and how to just make decisions overall in general in our life based on these 5, what we call our giant 5 values or principles for our family. And number 1, I mean, the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, strength. And so our number 1 value as a family is our relationship with God. And then number 2 is our relationship, my wife and I, with each other. And third comes our children. I mean, God gave us our children, and they're a primary ministry. Like, that's a surefire way to build the church is to raise your children in the way that they should go. And so that's a primary thing. And then, but the other 2 things are to steward our health so that we can have longevity in ministry, and so that when God calls us to something, we can go do that because we're able to. But then to use whatever tools and resources and God-given gifts that we've been blessed with to serve the church in any way that we can. And that's sort of, and to serve others, to love our neighbor, any way that we can. So that's sort of the framework that we use. We use our giant 5 values. We have a big sign in our living room with those things listed out, just to keep it on the forefront of our mind. Like, the number 1 thing is our relationship with God. And then second to that is our wife, or my wife, and children. And then, using whatever tools and resources God's given me to serve the people that he's put around me. And that's been really useful for us. It's not perfect, but it's been really useful. It's been helpful to give us direction, sort of give us a framework on how to make decisions, how to manage our time. So that's been a real blessing for us. I'll put that out there.
And Jeff, I will add this. I'll give a practical thing, because I think that's kind of what you were reaching for. It's like, what's a practical, tangible thing? It's not a cookie cutter thing, but what's worked for me is, like, I take Mondays off, period. Like, Mondays are a family day. Sundays are very busy. Oftentimes I'm gone from, 5 in the morning or 6 in the morning until, 10 at night. I'm busy doing stuff. And so Mondays, I don't have studies. I don't meet with people. I'll take a phone call if I absolutely have to. If it's from our elders, I'll answer the call, but they know Mondays are my family day. And so if they call me, they start with an apology and say, listen, I know that today's your family day. I'm going to keep it very brief, and we don't want to interrupt that. So that works for us. And so Kylie knows she can count on and depend on, she has me and my undivided attention on Mondays, and the kids have me and my undivided attention on Mondays. So there's that.
And I'm not sure if you guys saw in the chat, Danny, I want you to go ahead and go as well. Well, not in your talk. I think you had your hand raised. So I want you to share. I'm not just like pushing you in your talk. But no, Cliff had mentioned in the chat that at the 11 a.m. slot, well, if you're on the Pacific Coast, then 11 a.m. But Cliff, he's going to mention some time management in his lesson as well, and going to be touching on some things about patience. And so I think these 2 talks are going to blend really well together. And then so he's going to be talking about that. So stick around if you're able for that, because that's going to be, like, Cliff is a genius when it comes to that stuff. So I'm really looking forward to what he has to share. And so anyway, he's shaking his head, but that's okay.
I didn't say a genius on any of that, so I don't know what you're setting the stage for here. But
well, I hope I'm not over promising. I know you won't under deliver. I know you won't under deliver. Anyway, Danny, what were you going to interject, man?
Oh no, I just love how you just set everybody else up, for for our failure. So it kind of along the lines with what BJ was saying, but you look at Jesus and how he does as busy as he was, he allocates time. I think time is one of the great stressors for us. We only have so much time, and what are we going to do with it? How are we going to do it? And how do you decide what you're going to do with that? Jesus goes, I gotta take time with my Father to pray. He takes time with those who are closest to him as well, to train them and talk with them and make sure they have certain experiences they need to have with him. And so you see Jesus, bouncing around from different people to different people and situations, and not putting all his eggs in one basket, I guess you could say. But I think, and this is another side note here, for our mentality, we're doing what we're doing because we are trying to serve souls. Isn't that right? And I mean, what greater thing could we be doing than to try and bring the gospel to people and have souls saved, right? But I think if we're not careful, we can fall into a superhero mentality. Like it's got to be me doing this, and this is where we find ourselves saying yes so often, because we're going, I'm going to serve, I'm going to do this, and I've got to be the guy to do this. And so I really appreciate BJ's words, because I've found myself having to do that whole very thing of saying no, because I put myself involved in too many things. I was the president of the youth soccer organization here in town for like 6 years, and I finally looked at things and I said, you know what, I've got to step down and say no. At the same time, I was thinking, who are they going to have to replace me? What are they going to do? You know what? At the time when I stepped down, there was nobody lined up to replace me. And it was almost like, how are they going to survive? You know what? They will survive just fine without me. I think sometimes we oversell ourselves as far as, I need to be the guy to do this. I'm almost like the savior of the moment or the situation. And we got to get rid of that thinking. That is totally erroneous, wrong thinking. And what we do is we cause others to trust in us instead of in Jesus.
Yep.
And we set ourselves up and others up for the fall.
Danny, I'm amen to everything you just said. I didn't want to delve too deep into a rabbit hole, but you start, this idea that, I need to be the one to do it. I really appreciate you bringing that out too, because what it does is you bring people into the church, and, we're supposed to disciple people. And what you have is a bunch of people sitting around asking, what are they supposed to do? And they don't have a job to do because, well, I can do it better. And so we almost developed this. I like how you said it. I think, what'd you say? Superman mentality or superhero mentality. I love that. You are not the savior of the church. Jesus is. And it is not Christ-like to try to, I'm not looking more like Christ by taking it all on myself. I'm looking more like Christ by surrounding myself with people to teach and to watch and to take up the mantle and to do what I'm supposed to do. That's what Jesus did. Jesus didn't do it all by himself. In fact, he equipped his disciples and sent them out to do the work he had been doing in his ministry. And then he followed up with them. How did that go? And, so it's different. If we really want to follow Jesus, we can't do it all.
Yeah. And to that, BJ, and I think you brought out something about the whole like growth process. And, Jesus used the whole farming and planting seed and all that kind of stuff for a very, deliberate, specific reason. And Paul would even piggyback on that, saying, I planted, Apollos watered, God gives the increase. But, you think about a garden, and I had like 1,000 square foot garden I was growing here, but it required so much of my time. But I didn't go out and go, okay, I plant the seed today, and then I'm just going to water it all day today. And at the end of the day, it's going to grow and bear fruit. You don't do that. In fact, you water in certain amounts, and you don't just water certain area to the neglect of the others. But in the only way that I could accomplish tending to my whole garden was that I had to realize watering only takes so much. And then I have to sit back and just be patient and let it grow. Let God give the increase. And so we kind of almost think, we've got to be doing it all. We've got to, plant and water, and we've got to provide the increase somehow.
Yeah.
We've got
as though downtime's a bad thing. Like we need to have something going on at every hour of the day in people's lives for them to grow spiritually. That's not the case.
And so your talk about downtime, I think, is real significant. To be able to go, I need to allocate some of that time to myself and to and to my family. And so it's that whole, I'm watering self, I'm watering, in other places and all that kind of stuff, and not just so overwhelmed and stressed out. What happens if you don't do all the things you think you should be doing? What's going to happen? Is the world going to fall apart? Is it going to end? But anyway.
Right. Thank you, Danny.
Yeah.
So good. So good. And I want to go ahead and start to transition into Danny's session. And, I think one of my flaws.
Hang on just a sec, Johnny. I'm going to go take just a quick little break.
Okay.
So
no problem.
Or continue with this. I'll be back.
He's telling you no, Johnny.
Okay,
yeah,
he's
that's
telling
right.
me
I'm
no,
telling
so
you
he
no
gets
for
the
a
yes
second.
to a more pressing matter. We'll put it that way. And so
The opportunity cost I was talking about.
that's the opportunity cost. Yeah. Yeah, no. And it's funny because I think that what I was going to say was, Trevor put into the chat, say no to Johnny, yes to nature's call. Something we all must do at some point. But yeah, and I do want to offer a couple minutes here where people can go use the restroom if they need to, so they're not missing out on anything. But I just appreciate so much what BJ had talked about, and appreciate your time, BJ. I can tell you put a lot of thought into that, and it was a real blessing to everybody. I think one of my flaws as a event host is I do tend to, in an attempt to be encouraging, I don't want to oversell what somebody is going to, add pressure to the speakers. And so I really wish Danny was here to hear this, but I'll say all the good things about Danny now. And then when he comes back, I'll try to really downplay it as though it's going to
Mm-hmm.
So there's
Danny's okay. Yeah,
he's okay. It's probably going to be the worst talk of the day, and I just don't expect a whole lot. No, not at all. But he's so amazing, and he's a wonderful dad, just a great example. And I'll reiterate this again as people start to file back in here. But when I thought of people I wanted to have speak, I mean, the three people I thought of first were the three people who agreed to it. And it was just like, I want BJ, Danny, and Cliff. And you guys are just amazing mentors of mine and people that I really look up to a lot in ministry. So I've learned so much from. And so, but I'm really looking forward to what Danny's going to talk about. But I am going to take a little break here just for a hot second, and then go use the restroom. And then I'll be back to introduce Danny as he comes back. So Danny, I'm going to follow suit here. I'll be right back, guys.
All right.
And this is when we all talk about Johnny while he's gone.
That's right. And you can come back and watch it on the video later.
Yeah, he will. That's right.
All right.
Boy, do I have a lot to say.
No, I'm just kidding.
There was a lot happening right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess we both took the opportunity to say basically the same thing.
You want to hear stories, huh? I'll tell you.
Yeah, what to say about Johnny? Where to begin?
BJ, I was kind of piggybacking on Jeff's question, and I was thinking in terms of, the saying yes and saying no, and in light of Ephesians 4 does have a whole lot to do with, we're talking about equipping the saints and basically going here, saints, here's your role, here's your part in helping people to see that, which is part of us saying no to one thing, to just being the guy who just does it all as we might think it and say it. But in terms of that, like, what is your thought in to facilitate that, in terms of equipping the saints, or just being able to say no to people to help spur them on and get them engaged? Like energy, which hopefully my question comes out clear.
Yeah.
What any thoughts on that to help with the the balance in the process?
That would be part 2 of this series, I guess, if we were going to continue at least in my thought process with this for church. Where I would go next is talking about biblical mentorship, because how to develop this culture within a church, because this is a culture that needs to be developed within a church is developing biblical mentorship, in that everyone is cued in on what they can do, what their gift is, and everyone buys into this model, the Ephesians 4 model, that we are going to together, when every joint is equipped and doing its part, going to be able to accomplish the Lord's work. Now it's not just doing that work yourself, but taking someone else along with you. And so when you look at Jesus' ministry, discipleship and evangelism are actually the same model, in my opinion, because when you look at Jesus' model of discipleship, he called people specifically, was very intentional about who he was going to spend his time with. And then as he did that, he delegated certain responsibilities to them. Well, first he had them watch, observe, and it's kind of like the model with everything else. You do, or I do, you watch, I do, you help, you do, I help, you do, I watch. And Jesus had that model with his disciples. And so he picked them, he spent time with them, he delegated certain things to them, and then he followed up with them. And they started to do more and more in Jesus' ministry as time went along. And so if we can develop that model within the church and really develop biblical mentorship, that's also what scripture teaches, is not only are we to, equip the saints for the work of ministry, but for the saints, older men are to teach the younger men, and older women are to teach the younger women. That's also called in scripture. And so they're doing the same thing. And that's when the church continues in this model, is because not only is there equipping taking place from the leadership, but there's equipping taking place from the saints. And this model gets carried forward to each generation. Then that as you do your work, you're teaching someone else how to do that work also, and to step in and fill your shoes, so to speak. A really good, and why I say discipleship and evangelism are really the same process. There's a really good book on this called The Master Plan of Evangelism. And I think it's written by, I think his last name is Coleman, Robert Coleman, I think. I'll find it and I'll put it in the link here. But it is a phenomenal book, and will actually set up the model for mentorship and continuing with this process. So that's my short answer, but that's a really good question. And that's what I have found has worked for where I've worked in some different churches.
Yeah. Good. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay. Thanks for filling in the silence while I was absent, but we'll go ahead and transition into Danny's lesson. And if you don't know Danny, he's just an amazing man, and just he's a wonderful dad, a great example of a good, godly father. He's a faithful preacher and teacher of the word. And he's one of those guys where, like, when you talk to him, when you have a conversation with him, you can't help but be encouraged and walk away from the conversation with him thinking like, wow, I feel great. I feel like on fire. Like, he's just one of those people. He has this infectious joy and optimism that is just great to be around. So I'm really excited to have him share. He's going to be talking about, and correct me if I'm wrong, but he's going to be talking about freedom from fear, doubt, and anxiety in ministry. And he'll talk about that, I think, from a couple different angles. But I'm really excited to what he has to share. It's going to be real practical. And so, not to oversell, but Danny, you're going to do amazing. And I just can't wait to hear what you have to share, brother. Go ahead.
Hey, thanks, Johnny. Appreciate it. So, I mean, I'll just get right into all this stuff. If you want to know more about me, feel free to ask later or in the chat, and we can talk later. But because I'm already going, I've got all kinds of, I'm already feeling the stress of, I got so much to share and so little time to do it. No. So in right now, when Johnny asked me to do this, I was just going, I'm going to tell Johnny no. So actually, BJ, it's funny you talking about that, because I almost told Johnny no, because at the start of March, everything just started going crazy for my schedule. A bunch of things, it just went from like 0 to 700 is what it felt like. And I normally, I've been the kind of guy who's said yes to everything, and here I am. I ended up saying yes, so maybe I didn't learn. But I told Johnny, I said, I'll say yes on this one condition, and this is what we're talking about. And if you want it to be on something else, find somebody else. Because this is a study that we're currently going through about overcoming anxiety and doubt, fear. And we just decided to make that a study that we're doing here, and trying to, one, use this as a home study to generate some opportunity, evangelistic opportunity, just to invite people. We were trying to think, what is going to be something that will be truly relative to so many people, relevant, I should say, relevant to so many people. And we thought, hey, man, there's a lot of stress in people's lives right now, especially with this last year, and people trying to cope with a whole new way of things, and how to go about life, and people getting stressed about losing jobs or finances, and relationships, or looking at our economy, looking at politics, all that kind of stuff. So we've got a lot of things that are pressing upon us and all around us, and as preachers, as individuals who are trying to help deliver God's word to people, to keep people dialed in and directed. These are real challenges that are facing us. I feel like it's real challenges that are facing me as well. How do I deal with things that are going to be relevant to getting people dialed into right thinking and right living and all of that, when everything around us seems to be just falling apart? And how do you not let your own life crumble with the rest of the things crumbling around you? And then, of course, in our own work, how do I do this well when it, feels like it just doesn't seem to be working? I can only imagine that's how Jeremiah had to have felt. I mean, his message was just rejected again and again and again and again. Noah, I mean, preached for 120 years or so. And right, how many did he convert in that process? It's 8 souls that are aboard. We'd call him an unsuccessful preacher, probably, especially according to the standards that BJ was talking about, that some were placing upon him. But so let's start here with this. Proverbs chapter 4. And Proverbs chapter 4 and in verse 23 says, "Watch over your heart with all diligence, for from it flow the springs of life." Our heart is where it's at. So we talk about anxiety, we talk about doubt, we talk about fear, we talk about worry. This verse comes to mind a bunch because it gets us dialed back into what is the center point of focus right here with all of this. Look, we watch over our heart, out of it flows the springs of life. In fact, chapter 3 of Proverbs says in verse 5, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight." Now there's great promise there with direction in our lives and outcome. The hard part is seeing how it's going to happen. And I think a lot of times as people, to help us calm our anxiety, to help us be relieved of doubt and fear and worry and all of that, we like to be people who know how it's going to happen. In fact, as kids growing up, we often ask the question, why? Why? And my kids ask that question, why, Dad? Why? And we ask God the question, why? And God doesn't always tell us why in every situation. In fact, if you were to get a surgery, if any of you ever have had surgery, do you need to know all of the things that the doctor is going to do as he's going to be performing that surgery, how it's going to work, and all of those things in order for you to come out better off at the other end of this surgery? You don't need to know all the ins and outs of how it works. What you need to do is trust and know with confidence that the doctor is going to do his job and he's going to do it well. And it's the same thing for us with the Lord. And that's where, Proverbs 3 is helping us to understand this. Look, trust in the Lord. He's got you. He's got this. And that's one of the hard things. In my life, I used to always hear things like this. Well, just trust God. And I always felt like such a cop-out statement to me. Okay, well, yes, we trust in God, but I mean, when you talk about trusting in God, it almost sounds like you're just saying, you don't have any part in this, you don't need to do anything. God's just going to do it all. Well, we know God has us engaged and involved and all that kind of stuff and things that we do that we need to be about. But there's a whole lot that the scriptures have to say about trusting in God. And here we go. Proverbs 3 is significant to that. But the other thing that Proverbs 3 spells out to us is not to lean on our own understanding. And this is significant in this. So in terms of anxiety and depression, with regard to actually like clinical anxiety and clinical depression, I'm going to offer you up a book here. Let me see here. It's called Freedom from Anxiety and Depression, 10 Steps to Get Your Life Back Now by Mike Marino. So I'll just throw this up here. So this, and it's a short book. I love those. Those are my favorite kind. But he offers up some good things and some good insight. I'll just turn that over to you to dig in to find out how he goes into talking more about clinical anxiety and depression. He is a man of faith, and so he does offer up some things that speak to scripture and scripture's principles. Now, all that being said, I'm not going to take a bunch of time to go into all the clinical stuff of clinical depression and clinical anxiety. Just know that in mankind's study of humankind, we come to understand man's processes, and in all the clinical stuff, it's all divided up into all these different kinds of anxieties, and there are different levels of depression. And in the big scope of all of this, what this comes down to is our thought processes. In fact, to try and help deal with anxiety and depression, now I'm just drawing a blank on my my term that I was going to use. Cognitive behavioral therapy. You'll hear that term get tossed around. CBD, cognitive behavioral, CBT rather, excuse me, cognitive behavioral therapy. And it's simply the whole idea that through a retraining of the thought processes, how you think through things, what you think in the first place, you can actually go from depression to a recovered state from that depression. But here's the challenge that's faced with all of that, that some things, our being in a place of being depressed or being anxious in life, facing doubts and fears and all of that, it does stem from our thoughts and our thought processes. But then it can get to such a place that we don't know how to get ourselves out. Or perhaps think about a kid who has grown up in an environment that has been so horrible and despicable that it's beyond their own choice and their own control as far as their environment they grew up in. And so all of the way that their brain has been trained to think about life and to think about circumstances, it's like these grooves in the brain, and it's like everything funnels into that and through that, and you don't know how to get the thinking outside of those channels to any other way. To give you an example, think about saying your ABCs backwards. Ready, go. Now you have to think really hard. If you're like me, you have to think really hard about it to go, okay, so, I'm going to go backwards on this, and you're going to stumble your way through it. But you know your ABCs by rote. You've done it. You've been taught it all your life. It's been your experience, and it's like that. But it's the same thing with our thought processes. That it's hard to get out of the rut of bad thinking if that's what you've done for so long, or what has been imposed upon you, and you don't know to think in any other way. So cognitive behavioral thinking, and I believe the scriptures are very much behind this approach. When we're anxious, when we're depressed, or when we're distressed, or when we're doubtful or fearful, why do we get to that place? It starts with our thinking, and then the way that we think about things then affects our feelings, our emotions, the way we feel about it. And then you think about what happens as a result of our emotions. When we get emotional about something, we act on that emotion, and then we have our behavior. So it goes thoughts, emotions, and then actions or behavior. And then it becomes this cycle, but it all starts with the thinking. We behave the way we behave because of what's going on in the heart or in the thought process. Jesus talks about it. This isn't rocket science talking about this. Jesus nails that too. In other words, to put it this way, you are what you think. Or let me rephrase it this way, you are what you think about. This is why what we believe about God, what we believe about ourselves, what we believe in this life about anything matters really so much. So if people want to say it doesn't really matter what you believe, it actually really does matter what you believe about things. In fact, this is part of my recommendation for people as we're talking about anxiety and even depression, as I've dealt with some different people who being in a depressed state and or an anxious state, and we all do, and we're all going to be faced with that at some point or another if you haven't been yet. And by the way, I'm not a professional on any of this stuff. I believe God's word really does give us a lot of significant approaches and answers to just dealing with getting ourselves out of an anxious and depressed rut and into a healthy walk in life, just like the promises from Proverbs 3. So what I recommend to people is actually get your thoughts reoriented by by God's word, but let's get into the Psalms. See, while we look at all of God's word, and I think Isaiah 55 actually emphasizes the significant point where God's inviting people for change in their lives, right? Of course, we're talking about change from sin in their lives to doing what is right. And God invites them to take on his way of thinking as well as his actions. My thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, says the Lord. Whereas the heavens are higher than the earth, so my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. That's not just God saying, I'm so far above you that you'll never be able to think like me. That's not the point of that text. The point of that text is God's inviting to take on a higher way of thinking and a higher way of acting and living. So thoughts breed actions. And the emotions are in there in the middle of that too. In fact, there are other verses in the New Testament that speak to this whole thing about how our thoughts end up affecting the way that we act. Let's talk about Romans chapter 12 and verses 1 and 2, and not being conformed to the world, but being transformed how? By the renewing of your mind. And part of that, right before that, he says, or in that text, he talks about us proving the will of God, proving it to other people with our changed life. Change actions come from changed thinking. I was never a fan of the fake it until you make it kind of a concept. And yet at the same time, in cognitive behavioral therapy, one of the things that is emphasized is you have to start somewhere to help change your thinking to get you into a right place and right way of going about things. You got to start with right actions too. So it does become cyclical. Thoughts determine behavior, but also determining to change your behavior can also change the thought process. So let's make sure that we understand that. Now back to the Psalms. I said I recommend people to read through Psalms. Here's what's so significant to me about urging people who are dealing with anxiety and doubt and fear and just difficulties with life and struggling mentally, is that the psalmists get real about a couple of things. So the book of Psalms helps us with our view of God, helps us with our view of ourselves, and helps us with our view of our life circumstances. You see, and I think Psalm 22 is a great example of that. I want you to think about this with me. In Psalm 22, and Jesus would quote Psalm 22 when he's on the cross, right? My God, why have you forsaken me? David says that. Now, think about Psalm 22 as David is walking through this. He starts with a question. Anytime you see a question in the Psalms, man, grab a hold of that and realize this question is being thrown out for a huge teaching moment. David writes the psalm, I don't think necessarily in the moment of his struggle, but rather after the fact, because he uses this to show, look at where I was with my thoughts about God and my thoughts about myself. And then in the latter half of the chapter, he goes, now look at where my thoughts were with regard to God and my thoughts were with regard to myself. In fact, as he goes along, you'll see him question things about God. Not only, God, where are you in all of this? And I think it's interesting, God doesn't strike him dead for that, by the way. You know, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why have you abandoned me? Why have you left me helpless here? Moses would give a similar kind of a prayer, like, God, why don't you just kill me now? And this is, Numbers 11. I can't do this anymore. And people get to a place of thinking, I'm so distressed by the things going on, even like Moses, when I've been trying so hard to serve God and serve God's people, and I'm just at my wit's end. I don't even know what else to do. And then Moses turns to really kind of to blaming God. God, these are your people. Why have you tasked me with doing these things for your people? These are horrible people. and what's interesting is in that God goes, well, why didn't you say something in the first place? If you'd have just asked for help, I'd have given it to you. Here you go. Here's 70 other people. I want you to go ahead and appoint. Here's the solution. It's interesting to me that God waits for Moses to actually ask, or to come to that breaking point of saying, God, I need you. I can't do this all on my own. And God would do the same thing with the rest of the Israelites in the wilderness when they would come to complaining about food. We lack, we're missing these things. Notice where they jump straight to. They jump straight to complaint rather than jumping to just asking God for his help. And God deliberately waited for them to take an approach of how they're going to do that. Now Moses takes a better approach. He goes to God with his problem. David has in Psalm 22 said, God, why have you forsaken me? He says in verse 1, from my deliverance, from my deliverance are the words of my groaning. And my God, I cry by day, but you do not answer, and by night, but I have no rest. Do you hear the anxiety and the distress and the doubt and even the fear in his words? I think Psalm 22 ends up serving as a great thing for us to even look to for this, because watch what he does next. Next, he makes a comparison of himself with others and how God has dealt with them. And he's going to weigh it out. He's going to say, God, look at how you've dealt with verse 4. In you, our fathers trusted, they trusted, and you delivered them. Now David's making the comparison saying, I trust you, but you're not delivering me. Do you see his erroneous thinking right here? He's going, you helped others who trusted you. I trust you, but you're not helping me. So what's the problem? Now, maybe David might find himself wondering, well, so what's wrong with me? But you know what? He doesn't go into this. I mean, he does a little bit. Verse 6, he says, but I am a worm and not a man, a reproach of men and despised by the people. And all who see me sneer at me. They separate with the lip. They wag the head, saying, commit yourself to the Lord. Let him deliver him. Let him rescue him, because he delights in him. Yet you are he who brought me forth from the womb. You made me trust when upon my mother's breasts. Upon you I was cast from birth. You have been my God from my mother's womb. Be not far from me, for trouble is near, for there is none to help. Many bulls have surrounded me. Strong bulls of Bashan have encircled me. They open wide their mouth at me as a ravening and roaring lion, and I am poured out like water. Okay, so we're getting the idea David is in absolute distress and despair, and he's frustrated. He's frustrated because it doesn't seem like God's doing anything. And I don't know if you guys have ever been in that place when, just in your work and your service, and it feels like, God, I'm kind of not even really sure what's going on here. Are you even approving of this? Because actually, what I'm hearing from other people, this is where David is, everyone's telling David he's not approved by God. And here's when we're talking about anxiety and depression or doubt or fear, one of the huge contributors to that is that we begin to believe a lie that either we tell ourselves or we allow others to tell us, and we begin to believe it. And when we buy into the lie about ourselves, or even a lie, David is choosing to believe a lie about God here. He has fabricated this lie that God does not care, or God has forsaken him, that somehow God is not in the picture here. He's buying into the lie that others have told, that God doesn't approve of him, right? This is so huge with regard to having our anxiety, having our cares, our worries dealt with, or even if someone's in a state of depression, coming out of that is beginning to speak the truth or discovering the truth, learning to look at the truth. Jesus said, the truth will set you free. That's a loaded statement with so much to it. But this is why I say, urge someone, and even for ourselves, spend time in the Psalms to learn how to properly evaluate self against the light of God's truth, to learn how to properly see God in the light of circumstances, and to not just put God on it, sort of limit God to, well, kind of like Job's friends did with Job. Job, you know why you're suffering? They only had one answer to that. There was only one thing. Remember what it was? You've sinned. You've done something wrong. And it becomes this fatalistic thinking. Is it true that sin sometimes results in negative physical circumstances? Yes, absolutely. Is that always the case? No, it's not. And this is where the scriptures, the whole of scriptures, help us to see that truth clearly, to think through and ask questions that can help us get on the right track. So, making sure to believe the truth and not to assume. Look, assumption plays a big part in our role in this life. I want you to think about relationships with people, whether it's your own spouse, it's friends, it's enemies, it's anybody, and think about how many times you have assumed something about people, or people have assumed something about you. And then with that assumption, we begin to forecast or sort of prognosticate. And we go, well, if this, because my assumption has now in my mind become this truth, I've said it enough times in my head that I believe it, that means this is the outcome. And we've almost determined that the outcome is solid, like that is going to happen. It's fatalistic thinking. And it all stems from assumption, or even from believing things that other people tell us. Look, just because someone tells you something about you, does that necessarily make it true? Just because Johnny said nice things about me, does that make it true? That's his impression. That's his opinion, his view of me. Or in this case, David has individuals saying things about him. Guess what? In verse 8, when it says, it says, commit yourself to the Lord, these other individuals speaking to him, the ravenous wool or beasts, the bulls that he calls them. They are saying, commit yourself to the Lord, let him deliver him, let him rescue him, because he delights in him. Do you realize that these are the very words that the crucifiers of Jesus said to him on the cross? So when you look in Matthew 27, and Jesus ends up uttering the words, my God, why have you forsaken me? You know what Jesus is actually doing there? I don't believe for 1 minute that Jesus first was actually forsaken by God. And secondly, I don't believe that he was believing that God had forsaken him. I believe that what Jesus is doing is just like any of us would do when we might quote a verse. You know, if I were to say, in the beginning, and then you finish it, you know, where am I going? Oh, Danny's going to Genesis 1, or maybe he's going to John 1. But either way, you know, I start off a phrase and then it takes your thoughts to, oh, Genesis 1 or John 1. And I think Jesus is doing that here when he's on the cross, and he goes, you guys think that I'm all wrong and that I'm on this cross because I'm disapproved by God. But actually, the words that they said in verse 8 are there in Matthew 27. And they say those words to Jesus, and it's like Jesus is helping them to go back to and see, look, you are the ones who are actually doing the wrong and crucifying a righteous one. Because David would come to a whole new way of thinking in verse 24. For he has not despised nor abhorred the affliction of the afflicted, nor has he hidden his face from him, but when he cried to him for help, he heard. Do you hear the change in his thinking? And by the way, in this, he comes to this realization that is also a realization we need to come to with Jesus on the cross. And I think why Jesus says this too. Jesus is trying to fix the thinking, the wrong, erroneous thinking of these people who have crucified him. He's saying, you guys are doing exactly what Psalm 22 is all about. You're trying to say God doesn't, that I'm not approved of the Father, and that I'm not from him, and I'm not about him, when in all actuality, you're the ones who are in the wrong. And here's what we know is God has not despised nor abhorred the affliction of the afflicted. God has not hidden his face from him. I don't believe God forsook his son on the cross. Now, we could ask this question, did God forsake his son? We're getting onto another thing here. But in the end, God did deliver him, didn't he? He didn't deliver him down off the cross, but 3 days later, God didn't go anywhere. God waited patiently for things to be completed that needed to be done so that God could really show his power. Now, see, that kind of thinking they were lost on, but it's seeing the bigger picture, it's seeing the fuller picture that David comes to, and he says, you know, now that I talk through it, I realize just because I'm afflicted doesn't mean that God's not on my side, or doesn't mean that I'm disapproved by him, right? And this is something that we have to help other people see too, and help ourselves to see as we're dealing with stresses and we're dealing with anxiety, we're dealing with worry, is that we look back to what God really has to say about approval, and to take confidence in him and not let others or even our own selves talk ourselves out of right thinking and right reasoning. So the Psalms, I think, help in a big way with this. When you read the rest of Psalm 22, David goes, you know what? Because God, because of what he says in verse 24, because he has heard. I've cried out to him and he did help. It just didn't come when at the point when he's going, why have you forsaken me? It took David waiting a little bit longer to realize, you know, God is helping me. My enemies have not killed me. I'm on the run, hard things are around me, but you know what? God actually has helped me along the way. You know what was missing from David's life at that point when he's going, why have you forsaken me? He's missing the thing that Paul says in Philippians 4 to be about. So Philippians 4 verse 6, I mean, we're all real familiar with this, but Philippians 4 verse 6. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with what? With thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. Okay, look, prayer is a huge, huge way for us to get the peace of God in our hearts, where anxiety has the tendency to reign and rule. How does that peace of God get into our hearts? One, he says, we talk to God about what's going on in our lives, just like David did. And guess what? David did it in an accusatory way And God was still merciful to him and didn't strike him dead. Guess what? You know what God wants? If you're frustrated with something, maybe you're frustrated with God, talk to him. Maybe tell him you're frustrated about it. I think we learned that. Moses did it too. I think we see it in other places in scripture. But just be open and honest with God, because that's where part of the thought process and the healing begins to happen. Think about people who pay a therapist to go and see a therapist. What does this therapist do? Do they have this big lecture for the person and all the answers? What do? They sit there with a notepad and a pen or a pencil, and they write as the person talks. Guess what? There's a lot of healing and a correction of our thinking by virtue of us talking things out. And it starts with us talking it out with God. But Jesus taught us how to talk things out with God. And he says, pray these things. And one of them was your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And even when Jesus prayed in the garden, how did he pray? Not my will, but yours be done. Right? All right, what are we doing on time, man? We are okay. What time is 10:49? I need to get wrapping up here pretty quick.
You're good on time. Don't worry about it.
Okay. So when you look at how Jesus teaches us to actually handle wrong thinking from others, we talked about that in Psalm 22. And even how Jesus teaches us to pray, I want you to think about how prayer becomes a significant answer toward having that peace. Did Jesus not even have distress himself? Was he not sorrowful and burdened in his heart? Matthew 26 in verse 38, when he goes to pray in the garden and he brings his disciples with him, he says, my soul is deeply grieved to the point of death. Remain here and keep watch with me. Have you ever been that grieved or that distressed about something in your life? You know how you've been burdened. And this is something that I think is significant that we get from Jesus. And when we hear the words of his prayer, my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Now tell me, Jesus is God. Does he know the truth of what's going to be happening? That's why he prays this. But he knows the truth of it, yet look at where his emotions have him. His emotions have him not wanting to have to go this route. But he's God. And he's all about the will of God. Can you believe for one moment that he actually asks to go and have something done that is contrary to what God originally had planned? Well, can we change up the plan? Can we change that up? Can there be any other way? But then what he ultimately comes to is here's the right thinking that simply is about praying God's will. This is where anxiety, depression, and distress, doubt, fear, what ends up being at the source of all of that too is, or the result of anxiety and distress and fear, is we find ourselves focusing on self above others and above other things. Now it becomes all about survival. It's about me. It's about my focus. It's about my thinking. Jesus teaches us that while it is very okay to pray about what we want, in the end, it's very important to pray and understand about God's will and his purpose and be dialed in on that. The truth that Jesus understands about what needs to happen helps override a potential self-centered approach to prayer and a desire for outcome. Let me ask you, did God answer Jesus's prayer? No. Well, yes, because God's will was done. Did he answer the first part of his prayer and that request? No. God said no to his son, right? And to understand that How God operates is not always just in one way that I think it should happen or one way that I want it should happen. This is where letting our feelings run our thought process becomes problematic. So here's how it should go. We mentioned how um, thought breeds emotions, breeds action. But if a thought breeds an emotion and it ends up being all this negative stuff, when you get angry, what's your immediate reaction? Well, we kind of default to some things, don't we? So then maybe the anger turns out to be this lash out of frustration, and then you're lashing out at people you shouldn't even be lashing out at, or whatever it is. So what the Bible, what God teaches us through scripture is thought that breeds emotion should then be checked by follow-up thought to go, is the emotion and what I'm thinking I want to do as a result of that emotion, is that really the true and right thing to do in this moment? Well, how do we know what's, the right way to approach it? Is it going to be about me, or is it going to be about God, or is it going to be, is it going to be about others? So this is where coming back to the greatest commandments comes into effect. We filter everything through love God, love your neighbor, right? This is healthy thinking. This is right, truthful thinking. Is this going to result in loving God or loving my neighbor? You know what? Part of loving your neighbor was centered on the reality of loving self, right? So here's where I want to delve into this a little bit, where guilt and shame become a tremendous part of anxiety and depression and fear and doubt. Think about the first instance of shame. Where is it? It's in the garden, isn't it? Adam and Eve, they choose to believe a lie. They allow their thoughts, when God said one thing, to be redirected by something else that sounded super convincing, by Satan. And then the other factors of it that were also convincing to make it seem true that they should go ahead and eat, right? It looks good. It looks good to eat, and it looks like it'll taste really good. And not only that, man, it's going to benefit me. Look at where they went to how it was focused now on benefiting self as opposed to doing the will of God. It became will of self versus will of God. They ended up in this place of shame then as a result of, look at where I am. They became tunnel visioned with it as to what they were going to get out of it, or thinking only in one certain way as to how this was going to play out. And the reality is, they end up in a place of shame. Now, shame is one thing, and Mike Marino talks about that in his book. Our culture sees shame as a completely unnecessary and unacceptable thing. In fact, our culture does everything to try and prevent shame from even being a thing in our lives. The reality is that from what we see throughout biblical culture is that shame was a very healthy and right thing. It can be a thing that we use in a very wrong way in our own lives. And maybe you know somebody like that. Maybe you've been that person who has let guilt or shame hang on. And what's the point of guilt or shame as a result of something in our lives? The point of it is to help us see, I should change. That's the point of guilt and shame, to go from the dishonorable to the honorable. But where guilt and shame, and this is where Satan will use it to ruin us on the inside and cause us anxiety and cause us depression and cause us distress and doubt and fear, is that shame ends up amounting to this hill of a thing in our lives that is so burdensome that we think, I can't fix this. I can't undo this. Maybe you know somebody who's gone, hey, I would, if I ever darkened the doors of that church building, man, God would strike me dead, or something like that. There are people who, because of shame and guilt, think I'm never going to ever be good enough. So why even try? In fact, guilt and shame have a couple different things that come out of it. One is that we blow things way out of proportion. And those who cause us the guilt and shame, we give them too much credit. And then from our own standpoint, we undersell ourselves as to our potential to rise above it. And that's some of the erroneous thinking. But another thing about guilt and shame is that it causes us to sort of become reclusive and to just think that, oh man, if I can't get this right, if I can't get this perfectly, then everyone's going to look negatively upon me. It's just going to be a failure. It's going to be a flop. So I'm just not going to be around people because I don't want to risk failure and then the disapproving or judgmental comments or things from people. So that's a result. But another possible thing from shame is that people actually sort of become like exhibitionists with their shame. It actually, they kind of take this approach of like, well, if I've got all this shame and this guilt and stuff, it's a belief that I'm just this horrible person. Not that I've done horrible things, but I am evil. I am just horrible. So let me show people how horrible I am. Let me just be open and out there with it. And then we'll see if I'm accepted or if I'm not. And that becomes a result of shame. And all of that, of course, wrongful thinking. I want you to think about how things in our culture, things in our time also contribute to that, or come as a result of that kind of thinking. Let's say, for example, homosexuality and the belief about that. Think about how people have changed their views on that from believing it's wrong to going, well, no, let's support it. And even in the Christian world, how people have been shamed into thinking that we need to change our view on this when we know God says flat out, this isn't right. And then it's the whole, well, you hate people then. You're a bigot. You don't love, and God is a God of love. So how can you say you love God and you serve God if you are someone who disapproves of homosexuality, or throw anything else in that blank right there? And then look how it's spun around. So not only that, but now let's make this a grandiose thing. Let's glorify it, this wrong thing, so that, because who are you to judge me, or who are you to judge us? So let's glorify it and then turn it around and make you out to be the bad guy because you even thought that was a wrong thing. See how it spins around? And let's like exhibit this in a glorified way. Okay. So all of this is results of anxiety or approaches with anxiety. I want you to think about how guilt or shame was dealt with by two individuals, Peter and Judas. Yeah. So Judas, let's start with Judas here. Judas, we know he had a heart for money. The man, and Jesus even said, what you do quickly. And it tells us that Satan entered his heart right there, right? So he already had a heart desiring wrong things. By the way, I want to tell you with Judas, I really think that what's going on with Judas is he's a gambling man. This is a get rich quick kind of a scheme. All these other times he had seen Jesus escape. Jesus has always overcome. Every time people wanted to throw him off a cliff, they wanted to stone him, they wanted to hurt him, he's always seen Jesus succeed. This is a no-lose kind of a situation. So I think he takes advantage of it because of his greed. And he goes, let's get some money off of this. And then in the end, Jesus is going to be fine. I'll be richer for it. Everyone's going to be okay. No problem. And then look at how it snowballs for him. It doesn't go the way he expected. So part of his thought process ended up in this wrong place that made him make wrong decisions because he was self-serving with his decision about Jesus. And then look at where that ends up. The place that he ends up, the behavior ends up causing other things to just fall apart. And he goes, oh no, now how can I control this? Here's another part of anxiety. We think we can control so many of our circumstances. And we try to do that. And when that doesn't work out, it causes us anxiety. It causes us to be depressed because we are out of control. For Judas, look at what happened when things got out of control for him. The shame, I believe, got to him. He went back. He threw the money back at the money changers or at the Pharisees or the Sadducees, and he goes, "Here you go. I don't want to have anything to do with this." Trying to relieve himself of the guilt. But what does he do with it? Where is he going to go after this? In his mind, I mean, it doesn't tell us what he's exactly thinking, but I think we can easily see how this might work out. How can I face my friends? How can I face Jesus? How can I do this? And the only resolve for him to deal with his shame is he thinks, I've just got to end this. I mean, there's no way out. Now, if you've ever dealt with somebody with depression, that's the kind of thinking that goes on. It's very tunnel visioned. It's very in a certain groove that they can't see any other options. I've dealt with some folks with depression, one here in the church, in some other places where I've preached as well. I'm the chaplain of the police department here, and my very first call was a suicide, and it was a 12-year-old girl, and she left a note. And I tell you, I was like, God, are you kidding me with this right now? This is my first call you're having me go out on. How do I deal with this? How do I deal with the family? How do I deal with the circumstance? And why does this girl do this? All kinds of questions swimming around in my head. She left a note saying, I'm sorry to her mom, sorry to her stepdad, sorry to her best friend. But I'm just not, I'm not worth having around. I'm not good enough. And that was in her note. She felt that she was a burden. She felt that she saw life. And I'm thinking, does a 12-year-old have to worry about that's so distressing that she's going to take her own life? And everyone else struggled to see how in the world does this come about. And then I started digging more into, or at least found out more of some of the past and the history. And there were things contributing to her mindset, her view of self, her view of other people, and approval from others is a huge contributor to depression, to anxiety, all that kind of stuff. Guess what? That's why the scriptures talk about our being approved by God, and why we need to hang our hat on that to help others to hang their hat on approval by God and not other people. But with Judas, he saw no other way, no other recourse. Peter, on the other hand, how does he deal with the shame and the guilt? Remember, he looks into the master's eyes after the rooster crows, and he looks and he turns the other way and he weeps and he goes away. You know, it's like, I think it's like 2 weeks, if I remember right, before there's like a personal conversation between Jesus and Peter. All that time, in fact, who's at the cross when Jesus goes to the cross? Of all the apostles, who's there? John's the only one mentioned by name. There are 2 other disciples and some secret disciples, Nicodemus being referred to as one of those, and then Joseph of Arimathea, who take the body of Jesus and go bury him. But other than John, I don't know where the other disciples are. We know where Judas is. He's not there. Where's Peter? Well, so fast forward, we know Peter's one of the ones who runs to the resurrection, right? Runs to the tomb, runs to see that Jesus is not there, that he's actually alive. Look at how Peter handles this versus the way that Judas does. Peter is with another apostle at this point too. It's John. They're both running to the tomb, right? And then it's a little bit later, Jesus meets up with them at the house, and everyone's just in awe. Jesus has them touch his wounds. Later, he'd have Thomas touch his wounds. Jesus interacts with them, but where's the clearing of the air or dealing with the elephant in the room? Peter's denial of Jesus, right? Where is that? Well, that's in, John 21, 20 and 21, right? Jesus is at the shore. Peter and the other fellas out there fishing. They see him at the shore. Peter jumps in the water, swims over to him, and then what happens? They have this conversation, and you guys are all aware of the conversation. Jesus broaches it. Do you love me? And I think in the exchange of those words, it's very, very telling of something that's going on. I think Jesus is actually helping him to deal with the guilt and the shame. Notice Jesus doesn't harp on him. Well, you could say, well, he's asking him a pretty tough question. Do you love me? Hadn't Peter shown throughout all of his time with Jesus that he loved him? In fact, in so many words, he said, I agape you, by saying, even if everyone else denies you, I won't. If I have to die with you, I'll do that. Isn't that agape? He said, I agape you in that instance. And now Jesus says, so do you agape me? Whew, man, how don't you think that had to have prodded and hurt? It's almost like, Jesus, are you just like burying him in more guilt? But no, actually, Jesus is helping him to deal with the guilt. And what are Peter's words? I think because of the guilt, he goes, all he can say is, well, how do I tell you I agape you when I blew that? But now, I tell you what, here's another one I can tell you. I mean, you've got to know that I love you like a brother, Jesus. I can say that one, right? Because how else do I say I love you? You've got to believe me on this. And how does Jesus respond to him when he says each of those 3 times, I phileo you? And Jesus goes, great. So feed my sheep, feed my lambs, tend my lambs. You know, that's exactly how Jesus dealt with Peter when he first engaged him on the boat and asked him to follow him. Peter's on the boat in this miracle. They catch all this fish, and he bows before him and presents himself before Jesus. Get away from me, for I'm a sinful man. You see the shame and the guilt that's he's facing by being faced with God. And look at what he does. Jesus goes, don't worry. From now on, I'm going to make you a fisher of men. Do you see where Jesus helps him pass the guilt by not letting him dwell on how horrible or despicable a person he is for who he's been in his past? Look, your past does not determine your future. It has made up who you are to now, but it is not the king and the ruler of your life. Don't let it be. Jesus says, I can use you. It's how he gets him past the shame and the guilt. I'm going to use you. In fact, we're going to make you a fisher of men. And then you're going to help other people. So this, let me wrap up with this thought, because I know we need to bring this to a close here. Jesus does with Peter, a man dealing with anxiety. I don't know if he was dealing with depression, but a man dealing with guilt, no doubt. A man who dealt with doubts, walking on the water, took his eyes off Jesus because he focused on the other things that caused him to doubt, right? And that teaches us, keep your thoughts focused on the right things, keep them focused on Jesus, keep them focused on God and his ways, right? But Jesus does this thing where he says, I can use you for other people. Now get to work. Don't let your failure, don't let your shame, don't let your anxieties shut you down. Because the thing that we start to tell ourselves with anxiety and depression and fear and doubt is, I'm not good enough. Listen, you and I and every single person in this world who has messed up lives have been made in the image of God, have we not? And we've got to make sure we understand that truth and that reality. We may make decisions that are messed up decisions, but it is never so messed up and so far gone that there is no way out of it. That's the truth that God's word continues to promote to us. But listen to this, part of the way out of that erroneous thinking is to have a servant mindset. It's what Jesus was promoting to Peter. You know what's going to help you deal with your guilt, Peter? You know what's going to help you get beyond your own past and your own failure? Is if you stop thinking about yourself and what you did that was so horrible, and stop thinking about your problem and dwelling on it and dwelling on it and dwelling on it, and get out there and do what is good and serve others. Love God, love others. It was the advice that I gave to this lady here in our congregation who was struggling with some severe depression. And she had talked herself into the whole idea that the church just did not love her because the church failed to visit her when we should have visited her, and the church failed to really help her out when she needed help. And I'll say this, we had our own failures in that. At the same time, she was also discounting the things that we had done. She stopped being thankful, which is what Philippians 4 tells us. Be thankful when you pray to God. Gratitude sets us in a tone of seeing the things that truly are there that we've neglected to see. Thankfulness reminds us of the good things that truly do exist, of the right and true things that actually are currently in place, and that everything is not as horrible as it all seems to be in our minds. It's not as catastrophic, and it's not as fatalistic as you might think it to be. Gratitude helps us out of that, but also, here's part of that gratitude thing that I wanted to mention about her. I said, do you know what's been going on in the lives of our elders right now? Each one of our elders, their wives were going through some medical thing. I said, did you know that? She said, no. I said, have you called upon them to see how they're doing? Rather than just expecting for you to be the recipient of all of this love and the one who takes it all, but instead, have you been one to give it? It is more blessed to give than to receive. That principle right there is a huge principle to help drive us out of our anxieties, out of our depression, out of our wrong focus and fatalistic thinking, to rise up above ourselves and to help others. That actually becomes a healing to us. And you'd be surprised at how it blesses and gets you into a more positive state to know I actually am of meaning and purpose. A depressed and anxious person begins to think, I have no significance, I have no purpose. So get out and serve. Hebrews 12, verses 12 and 13 says, strengthen the hands that are weak and the knees that are feeble. Hebrews 10:24 says, consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not consider how everyone can do things for you. So that's what I want to leave you guys with. I mean, there's so much I wanted to share on this, but I think those are some key things that will help build the confidence from our right thinking to become right emotions. So Philippians 4 is huge. It lays all this out. The joy, rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say rejoice. The emotion that comes from right thinking. When we're anxious, we talk to God about it. He provides this peace. And then later, Paul says, so think on things that are good and noble and just and right and pure and lovely and of good report, all that stuff, right? And what's true. And then he says later on in verse 13, confidence, right? I mean, that's the verse that so many people quote, verse 13, about having strength in the Lord. The Lord is my strength. We gain confidence when we take things to God and we set our minds in right places, so the emotions become true and right, that then spur on action to good and right things. Thanks, guys. That's what I'll leave you with.
Amazing, man. Absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for the time that you put into all that. And as you were talking, I mean, so many things jumped out to me, and I don't want to take up all the time and share everything that's jumped out at me. But where you were talking in Philippians chapter 4 and verse 6 about being anxious for nothing, but by everything. And you guys know the verse. But then immediately after that, he follows that with what our family kind of calls our Philippians 4:8 thought filter, because we're big believers in everything you just talked about, and cognitive behavioral therapy and those things. Thinking about our thinking, I think, is so biblical and so foundational to our faith about renewing our minds. But in Philippians 4:8, he talks about think on the things that are true and pure and lovely and just and all of those things, and filter what you think about through those through that lens. And it's so important and so important. I want to take, I want to transition over to Cliff, but at the same time, I'm sure there's a lot to be said for what Danny had just talked about. So I want to take a few minutes. It's 11:18 now. Cliff, I don't know how long you're planning on going, but like I text you privately, don't worry about going a little long. I think it'll be valuable no matter what. But
I'll make sure I get people out in time for lunch. I
Okay.
understand that.
I'm more
Perfect.
concerned about what you say, Cliff. I don't care about lunch.
So, but anyway, if somebody had thoughts or something they wanted to ask Danny specifically about what he just talked about, then go ahead and jump in. And then we can also address some things going back into previous sessions after Cliff's lesson. So if anybody wants to jump in, feel free, and then we'll transition over to Cliff.
Danny, I just recently read an article and they were talking about kind of the same thing you said about with trauma making ruts in someone's mind and that kind of thing, and about how people with depression have a tendency to see things really gray, like literally the world looks grayer and things don't smell as good and all of that kind of standpoint. And the article is putting forth like this idea of if you can become more hyper aware, it was talking from more of a physical standpoint, like promoting yoga and exercise and things like that. But if you can learn to become more hyper aware of your surroundings and everything, it can help you overcome depression and anxiety. And while you were talking, that article is in the back of my mind. And it got me thinking a lot about the Psalms, as you mentioned. So many times when you see these dark gray moments in David's life in the Psalms, it always goes back to this idea of consider God, contemplate these things, meditate upon this, behold the wonders of God's creation. And I think there is something to be said for if we can realign our focus on the blessings of God, it makes sense from a counseling therapeutic standpoint, even from what I'm seeing. So I just wanted to amen your thoughts. I thought it was really good. I like people said in the comments, I hope you have something out there in print that maybe we can read or look over too, because there's a lot of information there. That was good stuff.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. And that what you mentioned actually, and I didn't mention it, but one thing that is tremendously urged for someone who's dealing with depression is physical activity. In fact, to the point that it almost, there's the question of medical aid, drugs, taking of, prescriptions and that sort of a thing. And one of the things that at least Mike Marino has to say about it, and I think he's on target with it, is the physical activity. And it's because he says studies have been done, like significant studies have been done about a certain group doing physical activity, certain group like doing just physical activity, no medical help, right, in terms of medicine. And then another group, medicine only. And then another group, these are depressed people, another group, medicine and physical activity. And the ones who succeeded the most or came out on top the most were the ones who both had medicine and physical activity. I've thought for a long time that, look, you shouldn't really have to, need drugs to help you out to get your thinking right. But at the same time, because it's like, how dependent do we want to become on drugs? What ultimately God shares with us is get your thinking in a right place. But that's easy for us to say because we're not in that depressed place. And then it's like, why do people get to that depressed place? And then how's all that happen? But I'll shut up for a second and let anybody else ask questions. But physical activity, very huge contributor to getting our minds in right places, and not just if you're in a depressed state.
Danielle, sorry, go ahead, Mike.
Oh, I was just going to say, Danny, I would suggest that you take those that you meet depression and take them with enjoying what you like, soccer. Yeah. Cliff, not so much. If anybody knew what Cliff did, he does, what do you call it?
I do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Yes. Yeah. I take depressed people to go do that, but anyway, and beat them up. But I'm just saying.
Well, it'll humble you real quick. But I have even had the people in the own gym tell me this idea, though, that when they started getting in there, doing that physical activity, and with the sport we do, you have to be very hyper aware of pain points in your body and discomfort and all of that, how much it strengthens them mentally. And I'm not discounting the need for certain medications and actual issues, but so many people have said when they spend time out of the gym too, man, I just feel down in the dumps because they're not enjoying, their body God has given them, enjoying creation, being outside, being around people. So yeah, it was good stuff. But jujitsu's fun. Mike, you can come join us. We'll wrestle you a little bit.
I'm sure you would, Cliff. I'm sure.
Hey, Danny, a couple things. One, I want to amen what you just said. The mind is a part of the body, and just like the body can get sick, the mind can get sick. And, there are things that are out of our control that we need help with, just like with a broken arm or broken leg. But there are also things that are within our control, like right diet, right exercise that we need to do to help ourselves. And so that's really interesting that studies, lend that way. But, as you were speaking, I'm going to have to send you some royalties because I've recently preached on Psalm 22 and Peter and Judas. And I think I stole your notes. So I'm going to have to send you some royalties on what you said.
We all have.
I apologize for that. I've taken your material and preached it and said it was mine. But anyway.
Hey, it's all God's, man.
That's right. That's right. Hey, we must be reading the same book or something. I did want to ask a question, and I know that we've got to get over to Cliff. I'm really looking forward to what Cliff has to say, and I'll try to go answer Nature's call as well before he jumps too much into it. It's an ongoing joke. My wife just gave me the weirdest look in the world. But one of the things I've read and talked to people about is what you cued in on, like what Jesus does with Peter to get him out of that place, and that is to give him something to do, like a task, a mission, like you've got something to do, to help him get out of there. And I've read that's why it's so important for new Christians immediately to get them involved and to give them something to do because of the mindset that they're more than likely coming out of. So my question is this: how do you motivate and spark someone who is perhaps in a place like we are, who is very involved in, the work of the church and has a lot to do, and yet still feels that sense of, hopelessness in that, kind of thing, like that uselessness kind of a place? Because, Peter, had that and then kind of went back to what he was doing before when Jesus, in both cases where Jesus gives him a mission, Peter's fishing. He's not doing what Jesus wanted him to be doing. So what about someone who is involved in that, like a fellow preacher who is in the middle of it and yet still feels this way? What do you do with someone like that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I can't say that I've necessarily totally canceled other preachers. I've talked with other fellows maybe going through something or
right,
whatever. But I like how God dealt with it with Elijah as well. Remember, Elijah's in that cave. He's wrong thinking too.
right.
He thinks I'm the only one here who's serving you, and God goes, "That's not true. 7,000 other knees that haven't bowed to Baal." Just because you don't know all of the people who are or aren't doesn't mean you know everything that's going on, and he made assumptions about things. But what God does, so one, God's approach is he gets his attention with some pretty dramatic things, right? And then God speaks to him gently in the gentle breeze, right? It's this whisper almost but God just goes, "What are you doing here?" And I think that's a great question, and it's a great thing for God that God uses to help us to know how to deal with people. So tell me, why are you where you are? Being able to identify how you got to where you are is the starting point for being able to get to a different location. Where did you take the wrong turn? We do that, and when we've gone the wrong way somewhere, and oh man, I got to get back to where I made my wrong turn. And I think God teaches us that. So it is a good question. So tell me, so how'd you get here? Why are you at this place where you're feeling like this and this and this and this? Look, in non-judgmental ways, and this is huge, dealing with people with depression, with anxiety, all that kind of stuff, is taking a very just a listening approach. But here's the other thing God does with Elijah. He says, "Get to work." Mm-hmm. Why are you here? Why are you in this cave? God goes, "What have I commissioned you with?" So what God does is God gives him a friend.
Right, Elisha.
Having Elisha, and he gives him a mission. God reignites for him or helps him to see again, look, you have purpose. And here's what it is. Now get to work. So be a friend of this guy, but be a teaching friend of this guy. We learn so much more and gain so much more as teaching others than as just students.
Right.
Right?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So if you help someone to see that, look, you have something to offer this person, or you have something to offer others, start thinking about, and even, as Paul would say, pray about others. Start there. Start praying about others and stop fixating on yourself. And when we find ourselves, how long would it take you to pray for everybody in your congregation if you spent just 30 seconds? How long would that
Yeah.
prayer be?
Hours.
And then what kinds of things would you end up praying about them? You might find out, I don't know as much about that person as I'd like to be able to pray about them. And then you start to go, maybe I should actually get to know them so I can know other things to pray about. See how it starts to open up where people would, those things weren't even considerations. So assign them to other people, even if it's start praying for others, that could snowball into other activities with others.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Danny. I really appreciate that. I was just thinking about that as you were talking. Thank you. And I like what Trevor says. He said, he cited Elijah too, and he said, just tell people nap, snack, repeat, get to work.
Yeah, I like it.
Okay.
All right. I'll be back.
Hey, no, thank you guys. I do want to transition over to Cliff because we're a little bit.
Sorry, Cliff. I totally stepped on all your time.
Oh, but I do. So I do want to transition over to him. I just to introduce him a little bit. He preaches in Visalia, California, and I don't remember exactly how long you've been there. I know you've been there since we moved there in like 2008. That was a long time ago. It was like however many years ago. So have you been there? You were there before then?
I've been here for 16 years.
16 years. Okay.
Yeah.
And in that time, he's a dad of 6. He's a faithful husband to his wife, Zinni, who's an awesome lady. If you've ever got the chance to meet her. And also, as he mentioned, he does do Brazilian jiu-jitsu, but he doesn't just do it. He's a master at it. He's a black belt. And so don't disagree with anything he says, or he will find you and he will submit you. Anyway. All right. Well, I'll let him jump in and share what he's brought for us. Go ahead, Cliff.
Well, I'm thankful for the opportunity, and I kind of feel humbled by the fact that I got to hear these other 2 lessons that are pretty awesome. And I took a lot of mental notes, and I'm excited about what I learned. And I truthfully, as I came about doing this subject, Johnny hit me up and said, hey, what would you like to talk on? And it kind of just clicked with me that same day, how long I'd been in Visalia. I still kind of consider myself at heart a new preacher, a young guy. I'm turning 40 this year. And this idea that, well, I'm still trying to figure it all out. But the reality is I've been preaching a lot longer than a lot of people have. I've been in one church longer than most people are ever in a congregation. Most of my preaching peers are not in it. This is the only full-time work I've ever had, has been in this congregation here in Visalia. And the fact that I've been doing it for 16 years, maybe there's something that I can bring to the table about staying in one place for some time. So I kind of started milling over that a little bit and started thinking about some other things that maybe make my position a little bit unique, that might give me some insight into this. One of the things we do here in Visalia is we do an internship program for guys maybe right out of college, where they can come in and work with me and with the church here for about 2 years and then go into ministry on their own. So kind of a safe place for them to learn and make mistakes and grow and develop their skills, and then go out and work in a pulpit somewhere. We've done that now 5 times. We've had 5 interns come through our congregation. And for the most part, one guy is kind of part-time involved, but all of them are still involved in ministry. And I've had a lot of conversations over the years with these interns and with friends and with, people and then my fellow preachers asking, all right, what do you do to stay in one spot? So I kind of was sitting down and thinking, how would I articulate it? What would I tell people? And I found that over and over again, the line that I kept saying that seemed to be the most profound thing I've ever came up with was, it takes time. It takes time to make ministry work. It takes time to get dialed into a congregation. It takes time to work into a community where you can make things happen. Just recently, I was in a conversation with my last intern that I had, Nick Westberg, and some of you guys know him. And Nick called me up and was giving me a hard time because we just started doing a whole bunch of programs that he had been talking about years before. And he goes, why is it that now you guys are doing all these things after I leave? And I told him, I said, Nick, it takes time. It takes time to get things done. I look back at the church here in Visalia, what we were 15 years ago, what we were 10 years ago, what we were 5 years ago to now. We are a totally different church. But the church that we are now started 10 years ago. And the ball got rolling, teaching started happening, changes started taking place. And now all of a sudden we're a different church. It didn't happen overnight. It took time. So if you're taking notes, my main idea this morning, almost this afternoon for some of you, is it takes time. So let's talk about this real quick. Most preachers, for the most part, don't last in ministry. They don't. They quit. And when I look at all of my classmates, I think my graduating class at Bear Valley was like 20-something people. Almost all of them quit. They don't preach full time anymore somewhere. There's a handful that do, but most of them gave up. And definitely, I think I am the only one that's been in one place for the entire time. So let me open up to you guys. You can leave it in the comments or you can turn on your mics. Why do you think it is that preachers don't last in one place for a long time?
Frustration and growth.
Growth of the congregation or personal growth?
I would say in congregational growth.
Okay. Congregation doesn't grow like we wanted it to, and we get frustrated. What else? Why else do people quit, give up, and move on? Johnny says it's too hard. Yeah, it is hard. What else?
Leadership difficulties.
Yeah, we butt heads with the leadership. People don't align with what we think they need to align with, and we get frustrated. We get angry. We're like, come on, guys, can't you see it needs to be this way? And elderships don't get it. Men's meetings don't get it, whatever it is. And we have frustrations with leadership. What else? Why do people move on?
I'm going to take a page from a discussion earlier and say unrealistic expectations on our own part as evangelists.
Yeah, expectations. We think it needs to be some way, a certain way, and it's not always that way. Trevor said the same thing. Yeah, false expectations. We think it's going to be better someplace else. I wrote down one word that kind of, I think, the reason why preachers don't last. And it's not a bad thing. It's zeal. I think we are inherently zealous people as preachers. But because we're zealous people, our zeal causes us to get really emotional about things. Now, that might be good in some areas. We get really emotionally involved in preaching and we're passionate, but we also get emotionally involved in all sorts of things that really don't matter in the grand scheme of things. For example, a couple of years ago, I almost quit because people wouldn't take down the number board. You know, the little number board that you put the attendance numbers on? I hate that thing. I think it's stupid. But for some reason, I got really worked up about we need to get rid of this thing. And I moved it, which apparently you can't do. That causes World War III in a congregation. So I moved the number board and then one guy moved it back and I got all upset about that. We're too focused. And I tried to make a theological point about it because that's what we do as preachers, and we're too focused on numbers. God's going to give the growth. Well, the number board is still there. And now I just hide the numbers, but we get really emotional about things sometimes because we're zealous people. Our zeal also gets us to be very impatient. Our zeal is good, impatience is bad, and our zeal often gets transformed into impatience. Our impatience makes us grow weary. It kind of gets us selfish at times, and oftentimes it gets us bitter because people don't move as fast as we want them to do. We become bitter, and here's what bitter preachers do. They start looking for new pulpits. I found in my own life that when I start browsing the church want ads and whatever your favorite website is, it's probably because I'm being a baby about something and I didn't get my way. So now I'm looking at another church that I think would appreciate me more. So I think looking at everybody nodding and typing amen and things like that, sounds like we all agree that we act like this sometimes. So the question is, how do we overcome this misplaced zeal, this impatient attitude, this bitter spirit at time, and last in a place for a decent amount of time where we can get something done? So here's what I've done today. I wrote down a whole bunch of points, okay? A 7-point list, which I don't normally, I do 1-point sermons. This is a 7.1, but I'm not going to do it like a sermon. So, and I'll give you the bullet points at the end of this. I'll put them in the comments so that way you can add to them. But I just started writing things down and then it just kept going and I got all excited and, so you know how it goes. But here's 7 things that I have found that help you develop patience and longevity in ministry. So we understand the need, and I'm going to tell you how at least it works for me. All right, so number 1, here's one that, and it's funny because a lot of us are in our offices as I say this. Number 1, you want to last in a place for a long time, get out of your office. Stop spending a lot of time in your office. And here's what everybody responds back with, but I have to work on my lesson. Here's the deal. None of us have ever missed a sermon. None of us have ever shown up on Sunday morning, even though maybe we weren't as prepared as we wanted to be, and said, sorry, church, I didn't get my sermon finished. We always make it work somehow. So my encouragement to you is find a creative process that gets you out of the office, that doesn't involve you sitting at a desk all day long. Because if you're in your office, you develop bitterness and impatience, and there's a lot of stuff that goes along with that. So quickly, here's what I do. To develop a sermon, I usually am preaching through a book. I love expository sermons through a long text or a series of texts, like a book of the Bible. Right now, I'm preaching through Acts. So I already know what text I'm going to be in on Sunday. Monday rolls around, I look at the text, I start breaking it down, come up with a general idea of what I want to talk about, and then I stop studying it. I mean, I read books and things, but I don't put pen to paper on my sermon till Saturday. The rest of the week, I do other things. I engage in ministry out there in the community. I go to the gym. I talk to people. I visit people. I read books. I watch movies. I listen to podcasts. And all that time, I'm consuming material. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, wow, we're going to be talking about Paul at the Areopagus on Sunday. Whoa, that really ties into this discussion I heard on atheism on this podcast I was listening to. Wow, that fits with this book I'm reading. That conversation I had with that guy on the mats on Wednesday, where he was talking about evidence for God, it all ties into that. So all that's going on in my mind. And then Saturday rolls around. I usually do some kind of mindless activity, like go for a run or mow the lawn or something. And then I have my aha moment. I start thinking about the sermon. Saturday night comes around. Then I put pen to paper. I do not spend hours after hours after hours working on a sermon in my office. Some preachers do that. But the more time you do that, that's less time you're actually engaged in fun ministry. And you know what? Your sermons will suffer because you're not relating to people. So my encouragement to you is, for your sermons, spend a couple hours writing them. For your Bible classes you're doing, spend a couple hours working on those. Maybe you spend a couple hours doing your church's social media, working on event planning, writing articles, whatever it is that you do. But it doesn't have to happen in the office all day long. And think about it. I guarantee it, that when you've been in your office all day long, you start to feel trapped. You start to feel like, you know what, there's something I would rather do. I guarantee it that most of us, being with our wife, being with our children, going out there, spending time with friends, being in the community. I mean, get out of the office and do something that you would rather do besides sitting at a desk, getting a phone call from sister so-and-so that wants to know, hey, do you have the number for this person that's already in the church directory, but I can't find it? Get out of the office. So here's my point with that. When office time, and this might seem arrogant, but when office time is worked around what you want to do, what you do in the office is more focused, and your time outside of the office can be more ministry focused. When I think that way, what happens is when I do go into the office, I'm churning out material like a madman. I'm busting out 10 articles, one day in the office and getting them all set up to be put in our bulletin for the next 10 weeks, because I'm more hyper focused when I'm in there, as opposed to, I'm in the office. Let me mess around on social media. Let me argue on a preacher forum about something and work up whatever brotherhood guy I like to make angry, and kind of do all that kind of thing, as opposed to actually, getting anything done. And when I'm not in the office that much, I'm out there in the community and ministry is happening. And I can make ministry work. I don't compartmentalize. I know a lot of it, you all talked about the idea of, I take time for this and time for that. I interlock all of it, and that's what works for me. It might not work for you, but I might be at home on a Tuesday at 2:00 watching the Disney Channel with the kids on the couch and also be updating the website. That's kind of how I do it. I might be going home and taking a nap at 3:00, which I take naps almost every day of the week for about 15 minutes. But right before that, I'm reading a book on leadership and then contemplating it while I'm napping. So, I kind of wove in ministry into everything that I do. But the less time you can spend in the office, the better. Now, here's what everybody's thinking. But my church wants me there. The elders gave me office hours. The men expect me there. Mine did too. Okay. When I first got here, I was supposed to be in the office from 10 to 4. Worst hours ever, by the way. I'm an early morning guy. So I didn't know what to do for the first 5 hours of the day. but 10 to 4, then it became 9 to 3. And I think on the sign, it says I'm here from like 9 to 12, but that's not necessarily true. Here's the deal. It takes time to get to a point where they'll let you be out of the office. Remember, I said this whole lesson's about it takes time. It doesn't take weeks. It doesn't take months. It takes years. For the first several years in ministry here, I showed that I was the most dependable person that they've ever had in the pulpit, because they've had preachers before that were slackers. They had preachers before that maybe they couldn't count on. They had people before that they didn't trust were getting the job done. If you can show the congregation that you are working and getting things done, they won't bat an eye when they see you at the mall at 1 o'clock on a Tuesday with your daughter. They won't be like, why aren't you in the office? What are you doing? Because they know that you get things done. So if your congregation is asking you to keep a log of your hours, it's probably because you're not trustworthy. If they're really dogmatic about office time, maybe in the past they were burned, and you got to prove why you're more trustworthy than maybe somebody they've dealt with in the past. So number one, get out of the office. All right, we got 17 minutes to cover 6 more. Number two, get really good at a few things. I emphasize that, a few things. As preachers, we like to think we're good at everything. Instead, look at your ministry and look at the things that you get the most excited about. Maybe you're the most excited about personal work. That just gets you excited. Maybe you're excited about media. Maybe you're excited about event planning. Maybe teaching is what excites you, or writing is what excites you. Find the things that you get really excited about and that you're good at, and focus on those. Narrow your focus on those and delegate the things that you're not the most excited about to the people that are excited about them. Okay. That's not you being bad. That's not you being lazy or passing the buck, but it's you're allowing those that are gifted to do certain things better than you to get the job done. Allow God to use their talents to build up the church. Maybe you're not the best at it. I'll give you an example. I love organizing our Bible camp, which pray that we can have it this year, because in California, it's kind of weird, but I love organizing our Bible camp. I'm a nerd when it comes to staffing, organization, evaluating systems, and trying to make things be efficient. My favorite thing about a vacation is planning it. Okay, that's what I like to do. But what I don't like to do, and it might sound hurtful, is I'm not that good, and I really don't like counseling campers going through problems. Now, I love the campers. I hurt when they hurt, but I'm more of a fixer than a listener. So when that girl or guy that's a teen at Bible camp is crying about something and talking about how they're having struggles at home, I can feel really bad for them, but I'm not the best person to talk to about it. So what I've done is, at our camp, I have appointed head girls and head guys, cabin counselors, that are awesome at that they can have those late night conversations, put an arm around a person and make them feel cared for and loved and appreciated, and teach them about Jesus. I'm not the best at that. I just come across as robotic. There's my mother-in-law jokes because years ago, my father-in-law was in a car accident in front of us. I had to pick her up and follow the ambulance to the hospital. My mother-in-law is crying in the front seat, and I'm driving her to the hospital because I like to fix things. So I figured I'll get to the hospital and make things better. But on the way there, she's crying, and I'm thinking, okay, you're her son-in-law and you're a preacher. You're supposed to comfort her. And she laughs at me because what I did is I reached over and tapped her knee and said, it'll be okay. She makes fun of me about this 10 years from since then, because I'm not good at that. But that's okay. I don't have to be good at everything. But as preachers, we have a tendency to arrogantly think we're good at everything, and our brethren will let us do everything if we let them. So be honest with them. Tell them, I'm not good at that, but you are. And then allow them to get plugged into those different areas of ministry. When I first got to West Visalia, I feel like I'm good at teaching. I enjoy teaching a Bible class. That is like one of my favorite things to do. What I'm not good with is organizing children's classes. When I first got here, they put me in charge of the children's curriculum for Sunday school. I've never been in a children's Sunday school class in my life. I didn't grow up going to Sunday school, so I don't even know all the lyrics to the Bible. So, I mean, that was a challenge for me. And I kept telling the leadership, I'm not good at this. There's better people. We have these women and this couple or these people over here that know how to do this. Let's get them involved. It took time. It took 2.5 years for me to get out of doing that. And you know what? I've had to fight to make sure they don't push me back into that because I know that I'm not good at it. But again, it takes time. But when you have a mastery of what you're doing, it feels you're passionate about it. They say the 3 keys to having a fulfilled work life is autonomy, mastery, and purpose. If you can get out of the office, you'll have autonomy. And if you focus on the things you're good at, you'll find that those are the things you have mastery of. And all of a sudden your work has more meaning. It's going to take time. It takes work, but we got to do it. So that's point number 2. Number 3, to have longevity and patience in ministry. Get over it. Oh, by the way, these all start with get because preachers are supposed to make things all start with the same word. So first one was get out of the office. What did I say? Second one was get really good at a few things. Number 3, get over it. This might be the most important one. You're going to get your feelings hurt. You're going to get mistreated. Someone that you thought was awesome is going to sin against you in some way. So you're going to get angry at times. You're going to get criticized about something that you're passionate about, and you're going to get upset about it. And this is where having a good wife comes in, because I'll come home from an elders meeting, or I'll come home after teaching a class and I'll be upset and I'll tell her that the brethren are stupid and I'm going to quit, and I'll go off on whatever it is that I'm upset about. And she's pretty good about telling me to just get over it. And we have to learn to do that. We have to learn to take a deep breath, to recalibrate and let things go. You're human. You sin. Your brethren are human. They sin. They're not perfect. They make mistakes. And I know what you're thinking. Yeah, but they're wrong about this. Yeah, they probably are. But you know what? We can get over it. Even when we're right, it's okay to let things go. Think about Timothy and Titus. Titus had to go to Crete. Timothy had to go to Ephesus. In both of those places, I guarantee it, there was people that they butted heads with. We know they were from the text. There was people that undermined their ministry. There was nasty people caught up in a bunch of different sins, and neither one of them were told to find a new work. They were basically told by Paul, especially Timothy in 2 Timothy, to kind of suck it up, Timothy, get over it. It's kind of what the whole second letter to Timothy is about. Now, that's hard for us as preachers. We're passionate people. We wear our emotions on our sleeves. And when things don't go the way we think they should go, we get our feelings hurt. But like Frozen says, let it go. We have to do that. We have to let it go. And this is hard for me. I'm a big grudge holder. Maybe that's why I get in fighting sports. But I brought up the other day to my wife something that happened like 20 years ago when her cousin complained about our infant child when he was crying. I said, that really upset me. She goes, why are you still upset about that? That was like so many years ago, and I'll tell you the truth. Every time I haven't gotten over something, it just made things worse. And every time I stopped and took a deep breath and let things go, it usually worked out. And there's been a ton of those over the last 16 years here in ministry. My first year here, I locked in a certain salary they were giving me. Well, it turned out after 6 months after getting paid a certain salary, it came about that they were actually overpaying me here than what we agreed upon. I found out that they were. I was the one that did the math because I'm a nerd and I like math. And I brought it to their attention. I said, hey guys, I just want to let you know that you've been paying me more than what I was supposed to be getting. My pay stubs are wrong. And I thought they would say, oh, well, that's great. Keep the money. That's wonderful. They said, well, hey, we're going to change it back to what it's supposed to be. I said, you know what, guys, truthfully, I've kind of gotten used to living this way. Is there a way that we can keep it? And I was told, well, in most businesses, if you're overpaid accidentally, you have to give the money back. So be glad. Oh, man, I was angry about that one. I remember I was going to quit over that. I was like, that's it. This isn't the work for me. I'm going to move on. But I talked to some people. I talked to one of the elders, and we talked about the situation. We decided to reevaluate salary in a year as opposed to a year and a half from there like it was supposed to be. A year later, I got paid way more than I was getting before, way more than what the mistake was. Because I let it go and I didn't make a big fight about it, it worked out better. Now I'm getting paid way more than what I was when I first started ministry, as an associate minister. One time I walked into an elders meeting with a list of guys that I thought would make a great intern. And I was told, oh, hey, we already decided who our next intern would be. And I was like, what? I'm the guy that's supposed to be working with them. What in the world are you doing picking a person without even talking about me? For some reason, these men that are fallible, just like all of us, for some reason that skipped their mind. And they could tell that I was upset. I almost stormed out of there and quit, but I stopped for a second. I didn't do that. I thought I'd talk it over with my wife. One of the elders met me in my driveway that night and talked to me and apologized. If I would have blown up at that moment like I wanted to, it wouldn't have worked out. Now we are stronger because I let it go. And you all have stories like that too. Maybe you did a program and you thought everybody was going to show up and only one person did. Or you didn't get the volunteers, you didn't get the buy-in, you didn't get the money for the funding or whatever it was. We've all been there. Sometimes you have to let it go. Pick your battles. Do you really want to make a big deal about what you're making a big deal over? Like the number board. I could have quit over the number board in the auditorium, but I have to ask myself, does it help the greater cause of Christ for me to be upset about this particular issue? If it doesn't help the greater cause of Christ, don't get upset about it. Oh, you're going to want to. You're arrogantly and pridefully going to want to make a stand. We all want to. Even when you're right, you're going to want to make a stand on that. But sometimes you have to let things go and think about it. In the book of Acts and other letters in the New Testament, we have Jew and Gentile having to learn to get along. You have the Gentiles that come from a pagan worshiping background that even involved like eating blood. And then you got the Jewish brethren who wanted to chop foreskins off. And yet these two groups of people had to get along. They had to let some things go, didn't they? We have to do that ourselves, but it's taken me a long time and a lot of bad decisions to learn that lesson. So that's number 3. All right, number 4. And this, I said, these are in no particular order. This is, I figured you guys are all smart. You can make application from all of this. So number 4, if you want to last for a long time in one place, get close to the people in the church. It's so important. Do recreational things with them. Go out to eat with them. Have them in your home. If you do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, invite all the deacons to train with you, and then you can exert your dominance over them, and they know that you can beat them up, which makes for a much better Sunday. Anyway, but invite them into your home. Become best friends with them. Become so close to most of the members in the congregation that you would not feel weird hanging out with them in shorts and flip-flops, and that you can text them funny memes that you found on the internet and not be embarrassed by it. That's the point you want to get with all of your members. If you're not at that point, you're not close enough to them. I've even got to that point now where I can text funny memes to elders. Man, it took me 15 years to get to that point. Okay. I mean, I started off wearing ties to elders meetings. Now I wear gym shorts and slippers sometimes. I mean, so it took some time to get to that point. When you get to that point, though, your family, you want to get to that point where you're no longer their preacher, your family with them. And what happens is people put up with family. So they'll put up with your own problems because you're going to have mistakes you make. They're going to put up with you, and you'll put up with them. And you'll always be part of a congregation where you're family. If I ever left this place, I'd be leaving my family. We're close here. In fact, I've had my kids on multiple occasions ask, hey, how are we related to so-and-so? And I have to tell them we're not actually related to them. They're just over at our house every holidays because we're close to them, you know, because that's the kind of relationship you want to have in the congregation. Now, all of you have your own ways of getting close to people. You have your own hobbies. Looks like Mike likes disc golf by the background that I see right there. If he takes out people playing disc golf with him, I'm sure he'll get closer to them. I like wrestling people, so I take them to the gym with me. But I mean, I've gone camping trips. We have members who say, hey, our pool's always open. Bring your kids over and swim anytime, and we hang out there. That closeness is what you want. And when you're close to the church like a family, you'll overcome all those difficulties because they don't view you as an outsider anymore. You're not just that preacher that they brought in. You're a part of that congregation. You're part of the identity of it now, just like they are. So number 4, get close to the people in the church. All right, number 5. Now this one's kind of worded kind of weird. Get away from the brotherhood and get into your local community. Preachers can be the worst, okay? And I'll tell you this, preachers can sometimes be the worst people for you to constantly hang around. Now, I know I'm talking to a bunch of preachers with this, but I had to learn this kind of the hard way. Early on in ministry, I wanted to be somebody. I wanted to be the guy that was on all the programs. I wanted to be the person that everybody knew about. And I did lots of things. I wrote in lectureship books. I spoke at conferences. I wrote articles. I was published and all those kinds of things. And I wanted to get my name out there. And when I was focused on that, all I got was drama. When I started getting known, there's problems with that. All of a sudden, people are criticizing you that you don't even care about. I don't care what brother so-and-so in a city 300 miles away from me cares about what I wrote. Why did I write that to begin with where he could see it? When I stopped focusing on being a name and started focusing on my local community, my ministry got a whole lot more, it got better, and I got more effective in what I was doing. And when I stopped caring about the brotherhood at large, now I know that some of you are in positions of influence where you can do that, maybe more, maybe you're involved in a university or something like that, I know. But if you're focused on being known, you're going to get known by all the wrong people, and then you'll have a whole bunch of drama you're dealing with. It'll preoccupy your time and all your conversations. So here's what I've done. I've started to turn down speaking engagements. At first in my ministry, I said, I'll never do that. Well, Johnny hit me up for the last HIVE, and I just ignored his text because I didn't even want to tell him no, because I didn't want to hurt his feelings because I kind of like him. But, you know, I've started turning down speaking engagements because it's better for my own ministry to be hanging out in the backyard of the member's house, barbecuing hot dogs on a Saturday night than being at the Freed-Hardeman lectureship or at a fundraiser dinner with a whole bunch of preachers smoozing and kissing up to one another. So that way you get attention. It's better for me to be with my brethren than the brethren. Okay. It takes a long time. It took time for me to figure this out, but not having everybody read my articles in the Gospel Advocate is a good thing. Now, I haven't written one in a long time. And the last one I wrote for a publication, I wrote with a fake name. I made them let me do that because I didn't even want to deal with it. I wrote a kind of controversial thing too. But I didn't want to have to deal with people, and because they're not in my congregation. Some guy in Memphis, Tennessee doesn't relate to somebody in Visalia, California. So I don't really care what they think about my stuff. Okay. I'm busy here. Being a big thing doesn't matter. What it requires is it requires you to influence the people that you're not going to influence anyway. The people I'm going to influence are the people down the street from me. That person at the gas station that sees me every Tuesday and Thursday with my kids buying Slurpees. The person at the gym who I coach their kids. That's the people I'm going to influence, not brother so-and-so. So for me, now this has worked for me. It might not work for you. The last few years, I've stopped being a part of the brotherhood at large, and I've started focusing on the people in Visalia, and it has paid off huge for me. I've had so many opportunities. In my own personal life right now, I coach about 50 kids in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu 4 times a week. I know their parents, I know their kids know my kids, and they're at my house now on Sunday nights for a small group gathering as we're talking about the Bible. I wouldn't have had that if I was always focused on being away and speaking and writing and dealing with the brotherhood and not the people in Visalia. I'm also, Johnny mentioned, I am a black belt. There's a hierarchy in jiu-jitsu. So I am in a position of influence in my local gym. People know me. They trust my authority in the gym. Therefore, they also, by proxy, trust my authority as a preacher. And when they have a need, they talk to me. They want to, when they have a need for prayer, they come to me. When someone in their family is looking for a church, they might not go to church themselves, but they say, hey, I train with this pastor guy down the street. You should talk to him. They don't even know anything about me, but yet they refer people to me. At my house 2 Sunday nights ago, because I'm in the community more, I had a guy who's a philosophy professor at COS, it's a local college, and his entire family in my house. I had a man who's a licensed marriage and family therapist and his whole family in my house, including then an elder and his family and a couple other members of the church. We're all together now, and we're learning God's word, and now they're coming to church with us because they see me. I'm with them. I'm not one of these preacher guys out here, but I'm a normal guy, and I'm with them in the community. Narrow your circle to the community, and you'll find that you'll have all sorts of opportunities to preach the gospel. My son's best friend, his mom is the children's pastor for the Assembly of God in a nearby town. She has become really good friends with my wife. Because our families are close, we're now able to discuss our differences. I normally wouldn't get a chance to talk to an Assemblies of God pastor, but now because we're buddies, we can talk about these things. I've been asked to do funerals and weddings and prayers at city council meetings, hospital visits to people I don't know, but they know of me because I'm in the community. Now, Visalia is a town of about 120,000 people. I don't say this braggadociously, but because I've spent time in the town, almost every time I go somewhere, I see somebody I know. It takes time to get to that point. And because of that, I couldn't think of leaving. Seriously, I'm so ingrained in this community now that even if the church fired me for some weird reason here, they become some weird cult and they don't want me here anymore, I'd still feel a need to be here in this community because of so many people out there that are kind of fringe connected with the church in some way that I want to help out. There's a lot of people that haven't even stepped foot in our church, but now they refer to me as their preacher because they know me. A while back, our building got graffitied. There was a young kid who's a friend of my son's who comes. When our building got graffitied, this dad of the son who owns a painting company volunteered to paint it, and he posted online, was excited to paint our church. He doesn't even go, but he feels a connection because of my family and his relationship with us. I couldn't have done that if my focus was on just hanging around all the cool kids at Polishing the Pulpit. If all I was focused on was hanging around all the preachers and getting well known, I wouldn't be known in this community. So that's number 5. Get out of the brotherhood and get focused in your local community. Number 6, this might be the most important one of all. I keep saying that about all of them. Number 6, get your house in order. Really. If you're having problems at home, it will affect your ministry. If you're married, your number one ministry is to your spouse. Pray with her daily. Be romantic, love her, build her up, tell her how awesome she is, because if she's putting up with you guys, she's probably pretty awesome. I mean, make sure you have a strong marriage. Absolutely. I see a lot of ministries fail because of bad marriages of those involved in ministry. Work on your marriage. Work on being a good parent. My job, first and foremost, is husband and wife, or husband and wife. Sorry, that's weird. Husband and father. Right? That's my number one ministry. So I'm first and foremost, I'm going to skip church stuff to make sure my kids are getting to heaven. And I spend the optimal amount of time with my children. Because I'm a preacher, I don't have to be here all day long. So I take my kids to their appointments. I drive to sporting events with them. I go home and help them with their homework. I drag them to things with me when they don't want to go. Yesterday morning, I made my youngest son get up and go to the dump with me to dump off trash. He didn't want to do that, but you know what? He's my kid and he's going to spend time with dad. And I gave him a whole list of 5 things, because I like lists apparently now, about 5 things he needed to do to have a good life. And I've texted it to all of my kids that have phones now, because I wrote this up the other day when vacuuming. Again, mindless activity gets my creative juices going. So get your house in order. Make sure you have a strong family. Absolutely. Number 1, do not neglect them. And if you are, I'll find you and choke you out. Okay. Don't neglect your family. With that too, get your financial house in order. If you're having financial struggles, that new, more appealing pulpit job is going to look better. That one that pays more, you're going to want to take it. But all of us probably, for the most part, and I know you guys are in different places with ministry, some have secular jobs and things like that. For the most part, our needs are probably met with what we're getting. What happens is we have lifestyle creep. We start buying things we don't need. We get into debts that we shouldn't have done. And as preachers, we get financially strapped. And when we do that, we have a tendency to get nervous. Our work suffers because now we're working for the paycheck and not because of the ministry that we're a part of. Let me encourage you, if you don't budget, if you don't plan, if you don't save, start that now. I recommend Dave Ramsey's program. I think it's really good, but I personally am a big saver. We have a cushion now as a family that I didn't have early on in ministry. Because I now have a financial cushion that if I got fired all of a sudden, my family wouldn't starve for a good amount of time. I can stand up for certain things that I do need to stand up for. I can fight the battles that need to be fought. I can go out on a limb and try something that needs to get done because I'm not afraid that the next paycheck isn't going to be there. That is really important for longevity in ministry. Having that freedom financially helps you out in regards to, now I'm not financially independent or anything like that, but I do have a safety net, and that safety net is empowering. And my congregation sees that. They see that I'm frugal. They see that we manage our money well. And because of that, they're always willing to help out with certain things too. when you're responsible in one area of life, people want to give you more responsibility. So let me encourage you to get your house in order, but that takes time. It's not overnight. There is no get rich quick scheme. You're not going to buy Dogecoin one day and all of a sudden become a millionaire. If you know what that is, I had a bunch of friends at the gym that did that and lost a lot of money. Okay. It takes time to get your financial house in order. It takes time to have a good marriage. It takes time to be a good parent. All right. Number 7, last one, get creative or you'll get bored. When you get bored in ministry, you'll quit, you'll move on, you'll find something else to do. And I don't know what that means for you. But for me, I like to challenge myself with different things. A while back, my coworker, Jeff, at the time, he told me, you really should put some Facebook Live material out there, which I hated the thought of doing that. I didn't want to be on Facebook Live. I didn't want people looking at me. That's weird. But I said, all right, I'm going to commit to doing it for 1 year. I like to give myself these radical commitments that people think I'm crazy to do and then prove them wrong. So I gave myself this radical commitment that every week for 1 year, I was going to put out a Facebook Live video. I did that. Then I was like, you know what? I'm going to go a different angle. Instagram's cooler. All the cool kids are on Instagram. So I'm going to go there and I'm going to do a 1-minute motivational Monday. I did that for a while. Well, then I thought, I want to go a little bit longer. So then I did 2-minute Tuesdays for a year. And then, so I put these challenges this year. Back in November, I set a challenge for myself to read 100 books in 10 months. I'm 5 books behind schedule right now too. So it's scaring me. When I'm done with this, I'm going to start reading again, but I'm doing 10 books a month. That is huge, right? I mean, it's hard to do, but I'm forcing myself to have a challenge. And by the way, having that challenge of reading a bunch has totally helped my preaching and things. But make a challenge, maybe set a project, maybe set a fitness goal. Because I do jujitsu, I oftentimes have to, I don't have to, but I choose to do tournaments and I purposely sign up for weight divisions under me. So I have to cut weight. Self-discipline, it helps. When I got to lose 15 pounds in a month, it forces me to be a disciplined person. Get creative, find projects to engage in, because if you don't, you will get bored, and bored preachers end up quitting and end up moving on. Okay, deep breath. I know that was a lot. I know we covered a whole bunch of material and I only went about 10 minutes over. For me personally, it just seems about recently that I went from being that young preacher here in Visalia to the guy that maybe people can trust. It takes time. It took time for me to get to that point. In the congregation, I'm part of a great congregation, but I still disagree with some of the things we do. There's times I get discouraged. There's times that, I wish things were done another way. There's times I wish we were more like the church down the street, or that we did things like this guy I heard on a podcast or anything else like that. But when I step back and focus on just becoming friends with as many people as I can in the church and in the community, it's taken time, but it's paid off immensely. Ministry takes time. They say that autonomy, mastery, and a sense of purpose is what makes for a fulfilling work life. We have that opportunity in ministry. We have a lot of autonomy. We can do things our way. Create an environment where you can. Mastery. Hopefully you're good at it. I think you are. That's why you do it. But find the areas you're good at and focus on those, in a sense of purpose. We are preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ. I can't think of a better purpose than that. So don't get discouraged. Just be patient. Endure the difficulties of ministry. It takes a lot of time, but in the end, it'll be worth it. So my encouragement to you is just keep on keeping on. That's all I had, Johnny.
Thanks, Cliff. I think it's pretty clear why I chose the 3 speakers that I chose, and it's just so much value. And I really appreciate everything you said, Cliff, and you too, Danny, you too, BJ. Thanks for everyone who stayed out for the whole thing. I do want to give. We are over. We're past noon.
Hey, I'll take questions if anybody has any comments or anything. I'm willing to talk for a while. I got time if people have questions or anything.
Perfect. Yeah, that's what I was gonna request. So we can ask questions and make comments and stuff. So I'm excited to hear what you guys have to say in response to Cliff's lesson.
Well, Cliff, I don't know what I just listened to, man. That was fantastic. Man, you're like my favorite person now in the whole world. I think you really need to work on expressing yourself better so people know what's actually on your mind.
The hard part is sitting in a chair. I can't talk sitting down. It's really hard to formulate my thoughts right now because I'm not standing.
You were a military drill sergeant in another life. I know you were. A couple things I just wanted to really, your point number 5, get away from the brotherhood, get into your local community. Man, I cannot tell you how much I have been so grateful for that being pushed into my psyche from different mentors in my life, that your focus is on where you're to minister, your house, your community. There are so many preachers I've seen that try to climb this social ladder and want to be known by other people. And what that breeds is this sense of contention and competition from other preachers. Like this is a competition, and it develops itself in other churches. I had a buddy of mine who was supposed to, he was quote unquote trying out, which I hate that word, with a church. And when they brought him in to see if this would be, a good partnership in the gospel, and they told him like, hey, we're bringing in 4 other guys, and what makes you better than these other guys? Like, why should we hire you? I was like, this is not what the church is about. This is not a competition, but that's what that leads to. And so I just wanted to, like, first of all, say, please speak that louder, speak that more, continue to preach that and do that. Absolutely. But I did have a question for you.
Too. With that point you made too, and I wrote it, or I didn't write it down, but it's, I should have, this idea of focusing locally too. Let me encourage you to look at your friend list in social media. If only the people you're adding all the time are preachers and people in the brotherhood, you're doing something wrong.
Right.
Most of your friends on there need to be people in your town that aren't Christians. Somehow they know you. Give them a window into your life and ministry will happen. All right, your next.
Right. Great point. I want to ask you about your point number 2, get really good at a few things. And I really do love what you said there, because you need to play to your strengths and you can't pretend to be great at everything. I absolutely agree with you there. However, I do have this question. How do you balance that out with the growth process? Because the point is, we can get to a point where we only do things that we're comfortable with. And when you're comfortable, you're never growing. But when you're growing, you're never comfortable. So how do you balance the idea of, getting really good at a few things with learning to get better at things that you need to challenge yourself about?
That's a good question. First off, do you have a podcast? Because you ask questions like a guy that has a podcast. So you're doing a good job. It's like a radio host.
Well, I appreciate that.
No, that's a good question. First off, that first point about getting good at a few things. I recently read the book Next Generation Leader by Andy Stanley, and he really puts a big focus on that. And I thought that was a really good point. If you want to read that book, it's a good one. Like I said, I'm reading 100 books right now. So if you want book recommendations, I got them like crazy. But that Next Generation Leader is really good about narrowing. I mean, obviously, he's from a mega church kind of standpoint. It doesn't always work in the way we do things, but he has some good stuff about narrowing focus. There's a time and a place for you to take on new responsibilities to set the example for the brethren. Sometimes I will do things that I am not that good at because I want to show the brethren that they can too. So I do that. I'll volunteer. Like I said, I'm not that good at Sunday school. But when we started back up Sunday schools after COVID shut us down, I did the little sing-songy and all that kind of stuff with the kids. And you know what? It made some people to go, wow, Cliff is all right with these people. And they kind of saw me in a different light, a less preachery light. I also think you should challenge yourself. Try to be better at new things. Maybe you weren't good originally at premarital counseling. Read about it, study it, develop material so that you can be. So there definitely needs to be a personal growth process. However, I think sometimes we fall into the doing a whole bunch of things not well, as opposed to doing 1 or 2 things really well.
Awesome. That answers my question. Yes, I really appreciate that. Thank you, Cliff. And again, this was extraordinary. I took 2-3 pages of notes here, and I'm going to go back over this later, but I appreciate your time today and just sharing these thoughts with everybody. Really well done. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions or any thoughts, any comments or insight you guys have had? Because some of you have been places for a while. What are you doing the last?
So Cliff, a lot of the stuff you were talking about getting out into the community, and that's been a big part of like what I've been trying to do here for like the last 10 years. And here in Susanville, our population's probably in the 12 to 15,000, or no, maybe more like 10. Sorry, so 10 to 12,000. And so it's a small community, and everybody knows everybody, type of a thing. And for a great deal of the time, I've tried to go, the whole thing you said about getting out of the office, man, I'll just go down to it's not even Starbucks. We got a local coffee shop here, go sit there, do my studying there. And sometimes that's and opened up opportunities to talk with people. Getting involved with, I was like, if I'm going to be involved with, or if my kids are going to play sports, I'm going to be involved with them in that. And so, absolutely. I went to the soccer board meeting. Next thing you know, I'm like, I didn't even know it was the annual general meeting where they vote people in. And next thing you know, I'm, being voted into this position on the board, and I'm going, what just happened? But I started to view that as not just, hey, let me do this because I love soccer and my kids love soccer, or my kids are going to play soccer, but just going, how can I use this to just try and like connect with people in the community, and just trying to use things like that in that way to say, hey, look, this is a way to show people the character, the image of God, and how God wants people to operate in this life and deal with daily life and different circumstances and all that stuff, and hopefully open up into relationships, inviting people into our home that we can connect with them better. So I really appreciate the things you said on that, because I think that is so significant. Jesus also didn't just hang around, just the 12.
Yeah.
He put himself around other people sometimes when the 12 weren't even there. John 4, one with the well, right? And they're coming back scratching their heads going, who is he connecting with and why her? And, or whatever. So anyway, I appreciate those thoughts. I think that's really good stuff to sort of, seed planting is so huge. You talk about it takes time planting seeds, and it takes time for stuff to grow. And that has helped my mentality so much in a lot of the stuff, because I've looked at it and been frustrated going, man, I've been spending all this time in the community. Why don't I have as many classes with people as I want, as I was hoping to have, kind of like you were saying, BJ, earlier, 2 months, man, 2 months is nothing for something to grow. It's patience, right? It takes time, and you never know when something's going to come at you out of nowhere going, wow, how did I end up with, how do we end up with this opportunity? So thank you for those thoughts.
And in that interaction with people on a daily basis, developing real relationships to not just, well, hey, I know you, so therefore I'm evangelizing. But when you have those close relationships where they're actually your friends, like as close as your brethren might be, that kind of closeness, then you become their go-to spiritual person when they do have a need or a question. I've had before, like a person I never had a Bible study with, this happened about a month ago, messaged me. It was a dad whose kid I've coached for about, like 5 years. He knows me. I've yelled at his kid and all sorts of stuff, right? But we've talked back and forth. Out of the blue, he messaged me and said, hey, Cliff, I'm thinking about getting baptized. I've never talked to him once about baptism, but apparently he knows we baptized. Somehow he had a connection, and I brought him in, talked with him, and baptized him. And it's just like, that wouldn't have happened if he didn't know me, and he didn't trust me. And like I said, being in that soccer board, now you're a real guy, you're engaging in this thing, and find something. All of us have some way of getting involved. I really recommend being in a position of leadership or teaching in the community too, because that by proxy puts you in a position where you're viewed as kind of an authority in some way. I don't mean that negatively, but being a coach, you're like, oh, he's a guy we already listen to. You're being on the soccer board, he's already kind of in charge. Oh, this guy is a substitute teacher. He already teaches, So in those kinds of things, I think are very beneficial too. Other thoughts?
I think it's neat for myself, since I am into disc golf, as you see. I'm out at Mooney's Grove quite often, which is a local disc golf course and community park. And it's amazing how many people I've been able to talk to, and how many, as I'm walking around, call me Pastor Mike or whatever.
Yeah.
Even though I'm a preacher, because I introduced myself as a preacher, and I preach at Church of Christ in Tulare, right down the road here, and we talk a little bit. But when they see me on the course next time, it's not hi Mike, it's hey Pastor. It's that kind of thing. And even though that title for me is not correct, because I'm not a pastor, I'm not an elder, an overseer, I'm a preacher, but they think of it as something else, as a teacher.
Yeah.
And so
they respect you, and they view you as something a little bit different. Yeah.
Right. And they see my attitude on the course, even though being out there playing disc golf shows me a lot that my attitude is not right a lot of times, but with my language when I get upset or whatever is totally different than, let's say, an unchurched or an unchristian. And they see a difference, and they do make comments like, playing with you, you don't do this or that. And so, yeah, getting out in the community is huge.
And I want to compliment Mike. Mike's in a town next door to us in Tulare. And I know he drove school bus, and there was a lady that I trained jujitsu with that knew that I was a preacher and knew Mike was a bus driver from bus driver. And she's like, "Oh, hey, you know, Pastor Mike." You know, people get to know you when you're out there in the community. So people know you too, Mike.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah. But before everybody goes, I just want to give everybody a thank you and kudos for being involved with this and helping Johnny out in this type, I guess, a ministry and the influence that you have all had on his life, but also on Trevor's as well, because different camps and through the church and stuff, you guys have really helped develop them two boys into what they are. And I thank you, all of you. So thank you very much.
Hey, Cliff, I was going to piggyback off of what Mike was talking about there, and a little bit everyone was talking about, and going back to getting involved in your community. So one of the things that I came from a place that expected office hours, even though that was not agreed upon. And I've been very clear and upfront when we came over here. One of the first things I talked to the elders about, I said, this is very important that I don't have office hours. I do my best work when I'm in a coffee shop or when I'm, different places in the community. And that is part of my work because I'm engaging with people. And I'm so grateful. Like, they have never expected office hours for like the past 60 years at this church of whoever's been working here. They trust you to get your work done. If you want to work at home, that's great. If you want to work at a coffee shop, that's great. If you want to work, at 12 o'clock at night, which is when I'm writing my Danville dailies, you can work at 12 o'clock, at night. You're a morning person. I'm a night owl. But what was really interesting is, when you take those times to seek out how you can get involved in your communities, because I think that's what happens is a lot of people think, well, that's great, I want to get involved in my communities, but they don't know what to do. Like, all you have to do is ask. Like, all you have to do is start asking people that question and go to your library, go to your community center, go to your police department, different things, and ask about those opportunities. There are lists that can be printed out for you, and no matter what town you're in, of different opportunities for service and volunteer work and different things to get involved in. I went and cleaned up our golf course. Like, I'm a terrible golfer. I haven't golfed in 5 years. And the last time I did, I cut my ear in half. Real story, different topic, another time. But went and cleaned up our golf course because they needed volunteers to do that. So I went and did that. The next thing I know, one of the guys invited me to go golfing with him the next week. And we're sitting there riding in the cart talking about the Bible and talking about God. And we're golfing together. What was I working? Yeah. I was also golfing. Well, I don't know if you can call it golfing. I was golfing, but I was working. And that wouldn't have happened had I not taken that opportunity to seek that out, figure out that was going on, just show up. I didn't know anybody, but showed up. And it's a neat, opportunity when you seek out those things. I think a lot of people are fearful because they don't know what to do. You just have to ask. And just really appreciate what you've said about that. And just wanted to encourage people, ask, find out, ask. And there are all sorts of things that you can get connected into in your communities.
And I'd also say, just do things you like to do. I mean, early on, before I got into jiu-jitsu, like 14 years ago, I was into dirt biking. And I used to go to the desert to go camping. We'd go dirt biking, and certain members like dirt biking, but they introduced me to coworkers who liked it. And after a while, I'm going dirt biking with people that aren't, from the church and stuff like that, because it got me into that circle. And now I'm at the dirt bike shop talking about where do you go riding. And, you get that. The jiu-jitsu thing has been a huge opportunity for me. I mean, I'm in the gym, 2 hours a day, coaching, teaching, rolling around the ground with people. You get really close to them. But some guys I know like shooting. Maybe you joined a local rifle range in their sportsman's club, and you get involved in that. Maybe it's a basketball league. Maybe it's what's the Toastmasters. You do that. Maybe it's the Rotary. We just recently had a lot of members get involved here locally with a pregnancy crisis center that helps counsel young ladies that are considering abortion. And one of our elders said, you know what, I'd like to influence them because there's some doctrinal things, that we maybe disagree about with some of their members. He says, I'm going to try to get on their board of trustees. What a huge opportunity to be now in that group of people. So you just got to go out there and do the things you like to do.
I love football, but I'm not good at it, so I'm not. I have a struggle there, but no, there are lots of things. I think that's exactly
Maybe
right.
fantasy football.
That's it. That's it. And so actually, we started a league with all my neighbors, and we did that this last year. And now we're so close to all our neighbors. We've only been here for 2 years, but we have the kind of relationship where when we're gone, I message them. I'm like, hey, I forgot to do this. Can you go into my house, do this, and leave my house? And they do it. And it's actually created an opportunity where we're starting neighborhood Bible studies. And people are going to be coming over to our backyard. You can't see it right here, but we built a patio specifically for that so people can come over and all just when they see us having a fire, they know to come over. We're going to be talking about the Bible. And it's a really neat thing that happens. But again, that only happens if you are focused towards that and you're intentional about that. It doesn't just happen.
That's super good. And, you know, one of the reasons I wanted to have BJ and Danny and Cliff as well is because these are all people who they do exactly what they're talking about. Like they're not just talking about it. And you can tell from how they talk about it, they're talking from experience. Like Danny is being a chaplain with the PD, like that was mentioned in the chat, and Cliff with the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and BJ with the fantasy football and the things that he does in his community. And like, they're not just saying it because they know who they're talking to and they know that we nod our heads and say amen. Like they're saying it because they know it's true. They've lived it out. They're speaking from experience. And so that's so valuable. So I appreciate your guys' time so much. And if anybody had anything else to share, other questions to ask, that's great. And we can do that, but also feel free. I know Danny, BJ, and Cliff all are more than happy to have you either email them, text them, message them on social media, and they're really generous with their time and they're willing to share what they've learned. And it was funny because Cliff, you were talking about how you were turning down speaking engagements, and I'm just really glad. I think everybody could say they're really glad that you didn't turn this one down. This is so valuable. So this will be recorded. I'll have this recording up. I'll convert it into a thanks for sharing your cell phone number there, Danny, in the chat if you guys want to grab that before we hop off. This has been recorded, so I'll put it up on YouTube, and then you guys could share it with people. I know there weren't as many people on here as there were last time, but that's not how I would judge the success of this event. I'm just so thankful for all your time. It was so valuable for me personally. And so I kind of put this together selfishly because I said, I want to hear what these guys have to say about this because this is what I need to hear. So, but I'm glad it was valuable for you guys. So if anybody had anything else they wanted to share as we kind of close out here, then feel free to do that. But thanks you all for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for putting it together, Johnny. Appreciate it.
Oh, for
Good
sure.
stuff.
Thanks for saying yes, Danny. I know you didn't. I know it was kind of on the fence there.
Thank you, Johnny. Really appreciate you. And all I can say is I'm glad I went first. I didn't want to have to follow up or Cliff there. So.
No, you guys all did such a great job. I'm really, really grateful. And then Cliff, I think you're onto something. I think you should write a book for preachers there with these 7 points.
I just give you a whole bunch of random bullet points that are disconjointed. I'm not writing nothing. I don't know what you're doing.
But anyway, so thanks guys for your time. If everybody didn't have anything else to say, then I'll go ahead and close it out. But yeah, thanks guys for your time. Appreciate it.
See you guys.
Bye, everybody. Thank you all.